Hello and welcome to our Pfaff Embroidery Mastery video. This is going to go over the basics of embroidery for new owners or returning owners who have a Creative Icon or a Creative Icon 2, or that have a Creative 4.5, a Creative Performance, a Creative Sensation, basically any Pfaff embroidery machine from about 2010 until present. This should be relevant to you. We'll be demoing on both the Creative Icon 2 and the Creative 4.5, and between the two you should be able to look at your screen and basically find the same thing that I'm talking about. This is going to be a multi-project mastery. This is a recording of what we actually do with my students in our Pfaff Mastery classes here at the Quilting Bee. And so we will be going through a couple of activities together to get you used to your machine and comfortable with it. Let's get going. So what you'll need to go get is one of your medium-sized hoops. So not the giant ones, that's excessive. So for instance, I have the 240 by 150 hoop, and it says it right there at the bottom. You can get anything that is similar, like the 120 by 120, one of your smaller hoops. You'll need 3 pieces of regular quilting cotton that can fit in this sized hoop so that they're bigger than this sized hoop. You'll need embroidery top thread. I have Isocord 40 weight, which is a heavy weight, and this is 100% polyester. You'll need a bobbin thread, which is a 60, 80, or even 100 weight, 100% polyester. That's a very thin thread. I have Cerulean is the brand, and I just have a white here. And then you'll need your embroidery foot, which I'm going to use the 6D. 6D as in dynamic, which is what it stands for. I would also accept the 6A as a substitute, but hopefully you have the 6D. Okay, we'll talk more in detail about some of these materials, but first we're going to get our machine set up to embroider. Here we go. Okay, so let's start by preparing our machine for embroidery. We're going to swap over from my sewing setup. We're going to remove the plate so that we can put our straight stitch plate on. And so I've taken off the bobbin cover. On other machines, instead of having a release here, you might just pull your bobbin cover backward. And you can go ahead and take your bobbin out. And then you take your screwdriver and you insert it into the left side opening and just twist the screwdriver to pop the plate out. We are also going to change our bobbin basket. Not everyone will have a separate bobbin basket for embroidery, but the Creative Icon 2 does. And we have a little cover that we remove, and then the bobbin basket can come out. And we're going to go to our black bobbin basket here. The reason we make this change is we want higher tension in embroidery. The balance is different in embroidery than for sewing. We want our bobbin thread cinched down nice and tight. Okay, then I can put this cover back on, and then I grab my straight stitch plate, which I know is my straight stitch plate because it just has a single opening instead of a big like hot dog mouth opening. So you're going to slide the straight stitch plate in with the tabs in the back going in. And then you can push on the front to pop it in place. And then I always check my work and make sure that that bobbin basket is in there correctly by turning my hand wheel and making sure that my needle doesn't hit anything as it goes all the way down and all the way up. Okay, so we've swapped out our plate, we've swapped out our bobbin basket. We also are going to swap our bobbin thread. Same bobbin, different thread. Unlike sewing, we use a very lightweight polyester, 100% polyester thread in the bobbin. This one happens to be a 60 weight. The reason we do that is to decrease bulk. We're going to use a heavyweight thread on top, and so we don't need to duplicate that heavyweight thread on the bottom when nobody's going to see the back. Of course, there's a few exceptions to this. Freestanding lace or applique, you might end up matching your your bottom thread to your top, but we save a lot of bulk and we save ourselves the trouble of swapping our bobbin a lot. We don't even worry about matching the color of the bobbin to the top because, again, nobody should see the back. Okay, we'll go ahead and pop that in there. I'm going to skip explaining how to thread the machine because we're going to cover that in our upcoming sewing mastery in a little bit more detail. Okay, now we need to put the 6D foot on, and we just pop off our sewing foot by pushing down on it. And the 6D foot has a couple things that need to happen. First of all, this gray arm needs to go behind and over the screw that attaches the needle. We would call this the needle bar, like that. At the same time, this post, the silver post at the back of the foot, needs to go into a hole on your shank. At the very back of your shank, if you poke your head back there, there's a screw that can be unscrewed. You don't need to unscrew it all the way until it falls out. Just back it out. That's going to open up that hole. And then you can see that there is an opening for that silver post to go into. So what I normally do is I'll start the silver post in the hole. And notice that I've got that gray arm tilted way back so that I am assured that it's definitely going to end up behind and sort of on top of that arm. Then my goal is to push this leftward and fully snap it onto the shaft there. But there is a gray platform here at the bottom that is preventing that to start. Basically, you have to flex the foot downward to get under the bottom of this shaft as I push leftward. So I tilt the foot back, I start that silver post, then I let the arm come forward and rest on the needle bar, and then I'm going to flex the foot downward and push leftward in order to snap it on. It fully comes over and hugs that shaft, and then you can tighten down the screw in back onto the bar in order to keep it from coming off. Okay. If you have the 6A foot, it's even easier. Let me pull that out for us. The 6A foot looks like this, and it's got a little bar, and the bar just clips onto the same spot that all our other feet clip onto, and this little horn here will end up sitting just on top of the attachment point. Super easy. But the 6D is my preferred foot, and I would say for most people it's the preferred foot because it hops all the way down, squashes against our fabric to give us a really nice tight drum effect when we're stitching. Okay, so to review, we switched our bobbin basket, our bobbin thread, our stitch plate, and our foot. You can also switch your needle. There is a specialty embroidery needle. However, it's not a uber requirement in the same way that you must use your embroidery foot. An embroidery needle is different because it has a bigger eye and a bigger groove down the center, which minimizes friction. Because unlike sewing, in embroidery, you can just sit and let your machine run at top speed for like half an hour straight. And that's quite a lot of like heat and friction on your thread. So if you minimize the points of friction, you minimize the chances that your thread is going to shred or break as a result of that friction. Now, during this particular class, we're not going to embroider for long lengths of time, probably about 5 minutes max, unless you decide that you do want to embroider full designs and pause me. So if you are embroidering just short amounts of time with me, you don't need to switch your needle. But if you do want to go out and get some embroidery needles, what you're going to look for is they're going to say embroidery, and they can be sharp or ballpoint. You would choose sharps for woven fabric, so quilting cotton, denim, batiks, basically all your standard quilting fabrics. You would use a ballpoint on a knit fabric that has stretch to it. So t-shirt fabric, fleece fabric, stuff like that. You would use a ballpoint. For today, I would use a sharp. Now you can choose a size, so they make them in 75-11, 80-12, 90-14. You can pick your size based on the thickness of the fabric. The bigger the number for the needle, the bigger the needle is. And so for denim or something, you'd probably use a 90-14, whereas for lightweight fabric, you would use a 70-10 or an 80-12. Finally, some packages will be marked as chrome or gold or titanium, which indicates that they're plated in some sort of harder metal that should make your needle last longer, like twice or 3 times as long. That's the good news. The bad news is they're usually about twice as expensive. So I usually have 2 sets. I've got my cheaper needles that are not titanium coated for projects where I'm worried I'm going to break a needle. For instance, if I'm putting in a zipper in embroidery, which is something you can do. Or I have some awkward layers and I'm worried that the needle's going to catch and break. I'll use my cheap needle. And then when I have a straightforward project that has little risk of me breaking a needle, I'll use my expensive needles. Okay. The last thing we're going to do to get ready is swap our top thread. As I mentioned earlier, we use a heavyweight 100% polyester on our top. We use a heavyweight, by which I mean 40 weight, because if I were to give you like a coloring page and offer you a choice of thicknesses of marker to fill it in, if you were smart, you would pick the thickest marker, so you had to do the fewest passes with the marker to fill in the page. Same thing with thread. We want a big thread so that we don't have to stitch back and forth as often to fill a space. It's 100% polyester for strength and color fastness. Now you can get rayon embroidery thread, you can get metallic embroidery thread. Those are specialty threads, and rayon is falling out of favor because it is a little more breakable. It was the original embroidery thread, very shiny, very eye-catching, but these days polyester is so shiny and there's so many color options that I really prefer it over rayon, which can be a bit of a fussy thread to use. Okay, again, I am going to skip my threading explanation. We will go over that in the sewing side, and we'll just get ready to go real quick. Okay, so when we wake up our machines, we will have the choice of going to sewing or embroidery. I'm going to select embroidery. And the first thing that all of our machines are going to want to do is calibrate the embroidery arm. We will see this kind of message a lot today. It's always going to ask permission to move the arm before it moves it. I think so that you have a chance to move your hot coffee out of the way of the arm so it doesn't knock it over. This way you can't say you weren't warned, essentially. So we're going to hit OK. And we're done calibrating. The first screen that we arrive at is the embroidery edit screen, and that'll be true for all machines. The first thing we're going to do is change the appearance of the embroidery edit screen if we have some preferences about that. So first of all, the first thing I always start with is I set my hoop size. Now, this may not be realistic to your life. Most of the time you choose your design and your design dictates your hoop size. But in class, I'm more concerned with us using a smaller hoop to be more efficient with our stabilizer and fabric, and we will pick a design to fit that hoop. So we're going to go to hoop options, which on the Creative Icon 2 is here at the bottom of the screen. And on the Creative 4.5 and similar models, it's on the right-hand sidebar. We can see a little picture of a hoop that says currently 260 by 200, and I tap there instead. Okay, on both machines, we get a list of hoops, lots and lots, some of which are the same size, and you have to be careful to read all the words, make sure, for instance, it doesn't say metal. So I'm looking for 240 by 150 for myself, specifically the Creative Master hoop, not the Creative Grand Metal hoop, and I select that there. Same thing on the Creative 4.5. Okay. Then we can choose things like the background color of the screen, as well as if there is a grid. So on the Creative Icon and Creative Icon 2, you should see somewhere an option for background color. Now, a little confusing on the Creative Icon 2, you have control over the color, but you have to make sure if you want it to be a color that you change the tint and shade scales to the vibrant part of the scale if that's what you want. If you just want black, then you have to go down to the deepest shade, or if you want white, you need to go to the lightest tint. So I do want white, so I'll keep it there. And then we've got my grid. 10 here is in millimeters, and that's fine with me. Okay. And we just close by hitting hoop options. On the Creative 4.5, we have options in this icon above the hoop. See a bar with an arrow pointing to a bar with dots on it? It's showing you that it can open more options. So I tap that, and we see things like the choice for a grid that can be toggled on and off. And then we can park our hoop, boring. And we'll come back to this 3D view. Basically, I never have 3D view turned on. Oops, didn't need to push that. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to pull a basic design into our editing area and do some basic editing on it. Right now, I can't see, I'm a little unclear on where the hoop boundaries are, which is what I'm interested in. So I'm going to open up the Edit Design on the creative icons down here at the bottom. It even has words with a little flower with a pencil on it. If you have a creative icon, you won't have as many words, but you should still have similar icons. And this is going to allow me to zoom in and out. I've got a little 100% slider here. I can zoom out a little bit, or I can do some brute force zooming, like zoom to hoop, which is actually where I started, or when I have a design, zoom to embroidery design. So it's subtle, but when I back away, you can see the boundaries of my hoop is this white square versus the darker gray around it. I think it's even clearer here on the Creative 4.5, where I still permanently, no need to open a submenu, have a zoom option, and you can see that black rectangle represents the hoop. We also have quick jump options for zooming on the creatives. We've got this little magnifying glass, and we've got zoom to part of a design, zoom to entire design, and zoom to entire hoop there. Okay, so now that we've got our view where we want it, we're going to pull in a design. On the creative icons, we're going to go for the flower, not the flower with a little globe in front of it. The flower with a little globe in front of it is if you were connected to My Sonnet and you were paying for a My Sonnet subscription, you would be able to search their online catalog of designs. We just want the designs that are built into the machine. And we can see a list. I want us to go to Flower and Leaves category. Notice you can scroll rightwards by dragging along here. Now, if your view is really, really tiny, you can drag the corner icon in and out in order to expand or decrease your view. You also can grab these lines at the top of the bar to move the whole bar around if you wanted. And I want design number 7 in the Flower and Leaves category. Now, I want to check first that it's of a size that I can use. Basically, I need it to be smaller than 240 by 150. So if I just tap on it and release, little information bar pops up. I tap information and it tells me it's 114 by 70, which is fine within the size of my hoop. So now I'll go ahead and push and hold on it, and that brings it into the hoop. Now on the Creative 4.5, we're going to go to the double lines down at the bottom of the screen. You might remember this because on the sewing side, this is also how you grab stitches. This is always going to be like design access, whether that be stitch or embroidery. And we've got some categories as well. We've got favorites, built into the machine, small, and quilting. So we'll stick with our just built in and we'll scroll through. And I like this little Pfaff logo. There we go. And it pulls it into the screen. Okay, now we're going to do some editing. By default, when you bring a design in, it is selected, you can see that we have an orange box or perhaps a green box, depending on your machine, around the design. And if I tap off of the design, that goes away, and now I'm not able to edit that design. So if you are finding, boy, I don't have any available editing, all my designs, all my editing options are grayed out, make sure that you tap your design and then suddenly you'll be able to do some editing. So by default, we're in movement mode. I can just grab my design and move it around. If I want to be more precise with my movement, then I do need to open Edit, which on the Creative Icon, that is a menu that is collapsible, and so I have to specifically open Edit Design. On the Creative 4.5 and similar machines, your editing is never closed. It's just always open. And notice that a movement icon is highlighted in green. Again, by default, you're in movement mode. It'll always start you there. Okay. So like I said, to be more precise with movement, you have a control wheel. Notice the very center of the Creative Icon screen, or off to the right bottom corner on the Creative 4.5, you have a wheel with arrows on it and a center icon. This wheel is multifunction. It will change function depending on the editing mode we are in. The editing mode is the circle that is highlighted or outlined in green next to that wheel. And like I said, movement is the first icon. On the Creative Icon 2, not the Creative Icon, but the 2, you have the option to see these icons as words by pushing information. And it'll tell you what all those mean, so you could say, this one is movement. Where is that? There we go. It's move. Okay, and then I could close that. But you're not out of luck if you have a Creative Icon or a 4.5. We all have a question mark feature. So somewhere on your screen, either along the top or side, there's a question mark that you can tap, and then tap an icon, and it will tell you what it means. It even will give you a link at the bottom that will bring you to the built-in manual, showing you a little bit more detail about that particular function. On the Creative 4.5, the question mark's in the bottom right, and you still have the opportunity to tap and learn more. Okay, so movement-wise, I did a little bit of brute force moving of my design. I'd like to reset it back to center for the rest of our movement demo. The center icon is a quick select that recenters your design in the hoop vertically and horizontally, perfectly centered. Just like the control wheel changes functions based on your mode, that center icon will change functions based on your mode, and it will do some sort of quick cheat function related to the mode that you're in. So in movement, it means center quickly. Okay. From here, I could use just one axis to move the design, say, upwards, while being assured that I'm not shifting at all left or right. And you'll notice there is a number attached to the movement. This up-down arrow is changing. It says 34.6 right now. That means I'm 34.6 millimeters above center. If I go below center, it becomes negative. Actually, we'll just quickly drag that down. Negative 47. The other number, the first number, is your left-right shift. Positive is right of center, negative is left of center. This should ring a bell if you think back to coordinate grids in middle school or high school, which are represented, points are represented with an X and a Y. X is always listed first, Y is listed second. And they have the same relationship of positive and negative, meaning above, below, left, or right of center. This is also true on the Creative 4.5. You can see that same set of numbers going up and down, and we still have a quick center icon that brings you right back 0, 0 on your XY coordinates. Okay, one last thing to show you about movement is if I want to put this design, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. If I want to put this design in the very upper right-hand corner, let's say, it is awfully stressful to hover here with my finger and really try to get it in the hoop. I know that I'm out of the hoop when the boundaries turn red. So that's not good, but I'm struggling here to really get in the corner. The cool thing is you can just drag your design outside of the upper right-hand corner, and then a new icon will become available in your edit options, which shows a little flower being shoved into the hoop. This is move into hoop. I tap it, it moves it into the boundaries of the hoop, but as close as possible to where it was when it was outside the hoop. So it's like, oh, I see you're trying to move that into the upper right-hand corner. Let me help you with that. And that is also available on the Creative 4.5 and similar machines. Oh, I'll go to the bottom right. Now this one, the outline doesn't turn red, but if you try to advance to embroidery stitch out, it will say design outside hoop area. So then I have this icon that shows a butterfly moving into the hoop. Tap that, and you're in the very most bottom right corner. So that's move design into hoop. Okay, so much for movement. I'm going to go ahead and recenter my flower to be able to go on to the next functions. The next function in the list is rotate, which looks like two arrows or one arrow with two ends on it pointing in a circle. And as soon as you click that, your control wheel changes. It says 0 degrees now. You have 0 to 359 degrees of change. Go ahead and play with that for about 10 seconds. Make sure you understand how those wheels work. And I want you to explore the use of that center button, which is now a quick cheat to do something different. Take 10 seconds and then I'll ask you, what did you find that that center icon did? Okay, so I ask you, what did the center icon do? If you answered, it turns the design 90 degrees in one jump, you are absolutely correct. And it just adds 90 to whatever number you were at. So if I was at 359, as I am on the Creative 4.5, I'm going to end up at 89 degrees because that's 359 plus 90. If I want to stay in the hard vertical horizontal planes, then I need to start at, say, 90 degrees, and then I will flip to 180, 270, 360, etc. So go ahead and play with that until you've found what you think is an attractive position for your flower, and then we'll move on. Okay. The next option is resize. This is a box inside of a box with an arrow pointing between them. And what pops up is the millimeter size. You can see that the numbers above it have changed. I now have 96.9 by 105.7. And I wonder if I rotate, will that change at all? Is that based on... So quick rotate is this little circle right above the design. I'm going to go back to 0 degrees. Yes, it is. So it was measuring it as a true vertical horizontal, not just the dimensions of the rectangle. So it is dependent on your rotation. So right now, the height is 69.8 millimeters and the width is 113.7. You can also see that on the Creative 4.5. This one is currently 56.4 wide and 49.8 tall. And again, I know that because width is usually listed first and height second. Okay, so resizing, we're gonna do a little activity. I want you to see how small you can make the design. You'll notice you've got an up and a down arrow. You can just push and hold on the down arrow, or you can grab one of these corners, push and hold long enough for it to note that you're touching it, and then you can drag inward. On the Creative 4.5, no dragging, just down arrow. Okay, so hopefully you found that it did stop you, just like it stopped me after a certain amount of downsizing. Can you think of a reason why it would stop you from getting smaller with this design? Hopefully you said something like, the stitches will be too close together. You'll tie a big knot. If it lets you resize infinitely, eventually all the stitches would be compressed into, an inch tall or whatever, and it would be way, way too dense for it to stitch. So this is a practical consideration where it stops you from downsizing beyond a 20% change. It was able to get 20% smaller than the original size. To go back to original size, I have two options. Number one, on the Creative Icon 2, I have a little original size icon that I'm indicating on screen. I can tap that. And on the Creative 4.5 and similar machines, you have a undo button. There we go. Okay. Now let's see how much bigger the design can get. Go ahead, while I do it on my screens, you go ahead and do it on yours. Okay, so eventually you were forced to stop expanding. Why would it stop me from expanding the design if it's not a consideration that the stitches are going to be too close together? Some people will say they think it's because of the hoop size, and it's not because of the hoop size. I actually have plenty of room still to expand on both designs. It is an aesthetic consideration. We're using the same amount of stitches, but we're spreading them further apart as the design gets bigger. And so if it lets you expand beyond 20%, it wouldn't look good. It wouldn't fill in the space adequately. And that's that's an industry standard, is 20% bigger, 20% smaller. What's cool is that with the Creative Icon 2, and the Creative Icon, you have the ability to resize more than the 20%. If you have a former top of the line, like a Creative Sensation or a Creative Performance, you might also have this feature. So you'll just have to be looking on your screen for the same icon. We are looking for either a picture of a big butterfly next to a small butterfly, which is what you would have on a Creative Performance or Creative Sensation, or on an icon, you would see this small flower becoming a big flower. This is going to take us to a different mode when we tap it. So we can resize way more than we can in wow, it's really tiny now, in the other mode, and it recalculates your stitches. We also have the options to move and rotate if we wanted that, return to original size. I don't think I need it this tiny. Let's, we'll go back to about there. Okay, and then you can either hit OK to confirm your changes or cancel if you don't want to, and I think I'll cancel in this case. Drag on screen to get myself recentered here. This is another reason that zoom to hoop would be useful, is if I've moved myself away from center, I can use my zoom option, zoom to hoop, and that'll recenter me. Okay. Select my design so that I can get my options back. So going back to resize, so we did our resize fun with the extra big recalculating. If that's something that you want to be able to do, but you don't have a machine that can, that is something available in additional software like the MySewNet Platinum subscriptions, or there are other softwares out there that can do that for you. And you would put those on your computer because you need more computing power than, say, some of the smaller machines have built in. Okay, one last thing to say about resizing in the normal mode is we didn't play with that center icon, which shows a lock. And as long as it shows a lock, I only have an up and down arrow. I resize evenly. As I expand vertically, the horizontal expands as well, so that the design stays the same proportions. If I tap that lock, it will unlock itself, and now I have the independent width and height adjustments. So I can do some distortions of my design. Take 30 seconds and play with the distortions that you can do to your design. And if you feel like you've made a horrible mistake, feel free to hit your undo button a couple times to get back to where it was. In the meantime, I'll show you with the Creative 4.5 and similar machines that you have the exact same options of distortion once you unlock. A long Pfaff. Let's undo that. Okay, find a stopping point where you're happy with the distortion you've done to your design, and we will move on. Next, I want to show you the reflect options. These are 2 buttons with triangles back to back. On my Icon 2, they are right triangles, and on the Creative 4.5, they are like little arrow type triangles, but they are back to back in the same way. And when I touch them, it flips the design over the X or the Y axis, depending on the set of arrows. You can see this achieves a flipped design that is not possible through rotation. You cannot get this through rotation. So make sure you play with both sets of arrows so that you understand your options there. And keep in mind that when one of them is active, at least on the Creative 4.5s, they'll stay green so that you know that you've done that. Now I'm noticing on the Icon 2, they don't stay active. So you have to look at your, let's see, I want to see if it shows that I've flipped it. Oh no, okay. So it just doesn't tell you anywhere on screen that you've done that. So you just have to remember that you flipped it. I'll keep mine like that. Okay. So that's reflection or mirroring for you. And the last basic editing that we have is to copy and delete. Copy is 2 boxes stacked on top of each other, which you can see here. And then you can drag them apart from each other. On the Creative 4.5, it is the 2 documents stacked on top of each other here. Copy. You have to wait a second for it to show up, and then you can say, ah, look, 2 machines. Now, if you don't like what you did, there is a trash can. You can hit delete. On the Creative Icons, you've also got a trash can in a box, and you can hit delete. However, I actually do want us to have 2 of your given design. So we'll go ahead and recopy if you already deleted, pull your designs apart so you can see them next to each other. And then if you want to pause me and do some designing where maybe you resize or reflect or rotate one of these so that they're not exactly the same, go ahead and pause me. You can do that. I'm going to keep my designs honestly just identical. I'm not going to create my magnum opus. Maybe the most I'll do is I'll reflect one of these flowers, and then I'll maybe flip one of these machines so that it looks like I've got a front and a back view of my machine. Quick and easy. Okay, so that is the basic editing options available to you on the embroidery machines. We are going to come back and play with, more with the layering and the colors, but for now we're going to go on to our first stitch out. To go to stitch out, you have different options depending on your machine. The icons will say stitch out or go, and we can tap that. And it pauses us at a pit stop to review your settings. On the Creative 4.5, it's picture-based. We've got a hoop that's highlighted in green. That means embroidery edit. And then we've got this hoop with a design in it, which is a butterfly, needles on top of it, and there's a little play or fast forward icon that shows it stitching out a design with the needle. And I push that. Okay. And the very first thing that the 4.5 does is yell at me to put the correct hoop on. The Creative Icon has a little pit stop for reviewing your settings. The good news is If I like quickly hit OK here and bypassed this, and then was like, oh no, I actually wanted to, do some settings, you can access these settings later. This is not the only time that you'll be able to access this, and we will work our way through these settings with the various activities. The ones I want to point out right now is that I can tell that I have a straight stitch plate on. I can review that yes, I'm planning to use my 240 by 150 hoop, and then I'm planning to use my 6D foot, not my 6A foot. You also have thread cut options down here. Automatic thread cutter means it'll cut between your different thread colors. I think that's a pretty important one to keep on. And then automatic jump stitch trim is when your machine has to move between different parts of the hoop. It will cut between those jumps. That's a jump stitch. There's a minimum beyond which it won't. So if it only has to move a millimeter, it's not going to cut your threads for you there, but it will cut the larger jumps. And for now, we'll keep that on. There are some reasons you would turn it off. For instance, when you're doing a lot of little tiny like lettering, it ends up being a ton of cuts in between, each individual letter, and it's very long. Cuts take more time, and it just increases the amount of thread on the back because you've got these thread tails from cuts and starts, and it can end up bulky when you have a lot of letters close together. So that would be one time to turn that off, or to just turn off the jump stitch trim and go to cut between colors. We're going to keep those both on for now, though. Okay, and I can hit OK, and we should end up at the same message, which is attach hoop. At this point, we are going to pause for a little hoop demo, as well as the world of Stabilizer according to Grace. Okay, so welcome to the world of Stabilizer according to Grace. And the first thing I have to say is that stabilizing is an art, not a science. And so I'm going to tell you my way of thinking about choosing a stabilizer, but there is always going to be more than one right way to stabilize something. And there's always experimentation involved. Whenever you start a new project, I'm really going to recommend that you get an extra of whatever it is you're doing, whether it be an extra hat or sweatshirt, or just extra fabric, to do a trial run where you're testing out your stabilizer, and then you're putting that project through the rigors it's going to go through in life. So if it's a wall hanging, you don't need to test hanging it on your wall. But if it's a soccer jersey, you should actually wash and dry the project, the test project, to make sure that you've stabilized the project correctly and make adjustments if necessary. So the reason in general that we use stabilizer at all is because stitching crunches your fabric, right? You know that if you've done a zigzag stitch on a thin fabric and it crunches your fabric. And there's tons of stitching in embroidery really close together. So your fabric is going to crunch unless you give it some help with a extra stiffening power, essentially. And it doesn't just need the help during the stitch out. Your design needs help during its life as well, especially if it's going to go in a washer or a dryer or get sweated on, or, get crumpled as you take the sweatshirt on and off or something like that. So when we stabilize for both the stitch out and the life of the product. When you start to look into stabilizer, you're going to find that there are a couple major divisions between stabilizer. The first one is how the stabilizer is removed. There are cutaways, tearaways, and washaways. Cutaways are, as the name implies, cut out of the project. I have one right here, for example, and it's really like a sewing interfacing. You can tell it's a cutaway because you can't tear it. And that's how I test it at home when I've forgotten what I've, cut here. And it won't dissolve in water. When I go to cut it away, the design, let's say the design was a circle of this proportion, I would cut out, leaving, say, a 1/4 inch buffer around the design. It loses its stability if you cut right up into the design, not to even speak of the fact that you might cut your stitching. So you always leave a buffer with a cutaway. Okay. Cutaways are the longest lasting. They're the most durable stabilizer. They should hold up, with lots of washing and drying. And the most of it is left behind. So for the heaviest used items, you would leave the cutaway, more cutaway in with that buffer, and it's going to have the strongest stabilizing long term for heavy use items. Okay. Tearaway is terrible as, well, it's not horrible, it's able to be torn, as the name implies. And here is an example. Probably looks the same on the camera, but it is able to be torn. This happens to be a pretty light tearaway. This one's, softer than regular paper, but you can get tearaway that's like cardstock. There's a lot of range in tearaway, but they're all able to be torn. And when you tear them, you tear right up to your stitching. So again, with the circle example, lost my pen already, you would tear right up to the circle, and the perforation of the stitching is going to help you tear. So more of the stabilizer comes out. If the recipient of the product were to turn the product inside out, they would see very little stabilizer. They would just barely see some white behind your stitching, and they would hardly notice it. So tearaway is great because it is pretty imperceptible, but it still provides a medium amount of long-term stabilizing. It can still be, say, washed and dried, and it should stick around and stabilize for a while, though not as long as cutaway. Okay, so tearaway is like one of my favorites. Washaway is a different beast. This one here is a traditional washaway. There's more than one kind. They can look a little different. It kind of looks like a dryer sheet, and it can be torn, but it doesn't tear very nice. And this one, there we go. Yeah, it kind of frays as it tears. So that's not a tearaway. And I'm not going to lick it. I have seen people lick their stabilizer. I'll just dip mine in water. It will get sticky and then sort of melt away with water. And it can take a little bit of time. Warm water would help. Let's see if we can make this melt a little bit. And it's starting to distort, and there we go. Yep, peel away, and it's getting real slimy. Delightful. Okay, so washaway is really seductive to new embroiderers, myself included, because we like the idea that the washaway could be totally removed and nobody would see that we'd ever had this ugly stabilizer on the back of our fabric. However, in the long run, it's not good for most projects because most projects need stabilizing after the fact. Even stuff that hangs on the wall could benefit from, a little bit of long-term stabilizing. So I would consider washaway a specialty product that specialty items are going to tell you to use. So when you buy a freestanding lace design that looks like a doily, it will tell you to use washaway because in that case you are totally removing the washaway to create a freestanding product. But most of the time I would say you're not going to elect to use washaway instead of tearaway because most projects aren't going to deal super well with that long term. And to get it out, you have to submerge your project in water. And a lot of things never look the same after being submerged. I think that batting never looks the same after being submerged in water, even though you dried it out and ironed it. So I'm cautious about washaway. We'll talk about a use of washaway at our last activity. And there are some applications where I really like it, but I wouldn't say you need to run out and buy washaway. Okay, now variants on a theme. Those are the three major categories: cutaway, tearaway, and washaway. And we've sort of established cutaways last the longest for heavy use items. Tearaways are a middling, amount of stabilizing, and then washaways are specialty, and you wouldn't want to use it for something that's going to be, moved or washed or what have you. Within each of those categories, there are lots of options. The big option that you're going to have to make a choice on immediately is the weight. So within cutaway, there's heavyweight, medium weight, lightweight. Within tearaway, there's heavy, medium, light. My thought about how to choose the lightness is the density of your design. How tight are your stitches? How much help does your fabric need stabilizing itself? So for a very light design, like a quilting design that's just a straight stitch, doing a stipple, but you're doing it in your hoop, you can use a very lightweight stabilizer or no stabilizer at all. Be cautious about that. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Because that design isn't very dense, it's not going to apply much crunching power to your project. If your design is very, very heavy, lots of stitches close together, and you do have to do a couple to get a feel for that. It can be hard when you're first starting out, but once you've done some embroidery, you'll be able to say, wow, 20,000 stitches in a 7-inch square, that's very dense. So you'll get a feel for it. You better use a lot of stabilizer in that case. So heaviness, in my mind, is based on the density of the design, and that's going to help it during stitch out. If your product has some oomph to it, say like a nice heavyweight fleece or a canvas, something that is thicker or stiffer, it can do some of its own stabilizing, and you can get away with a relatively lighter stabilizer than you would need for a lighter weight fabric with the same density of design. A great example would be like a fleece, where normally I would say you need to use a cutaway because you would, wash and dry a garment a lot, especially like a sports fleece. But because, nice dense fleeces have some oomph to them, you can get away with a tearaway because it'll provide some of its own stabilizing power long term. And again, now you're seeing this is why you need to guess and check and have an extra. Even when you're doing, commissions, consignments, I would say the really professional, people will ask the person commissioning them, I need an extra sweatshirt. Or if they're not provided one, they will go buy a sweatshirt as close as possible to the sweatshirt they're being provided and do a bunch of testing, all over the sides and back of the jacket until they feel like they've got the stabilizer correct. Okay, so to review, you pick your category based on the life of the project. If it's going to be heavily used, heavily washed, cutaway. Within that, you could say, it's a heavyweight fleece, so I don't need that much stabilizing because it'll stabilize itself, and the design is somewhat lightweight. I could use a lightweight cutaway. And you can get cutaways that feel, almost like fabric. They're flexible. Using a cutaway doesn't have to mean that you have this ugly, crispy stabilizer on the inside. Heck, you can even cover up the inside of the design, of the product. You can fuse, something behind it. So don't count out cutaway. I think a lot of people hate cutaway because you leave some of it in. But you can get a really lightweight cutaway and you can cover it up if it really bothers you. You choose, a tearaway based on medium use. Like a quilt label, I would say I'd use a tearaway. It's going to be less perceptible in the final product because more of it gets taken out. And then again, you choose heavy, medium, light based on the density of the design, the heaviness of the product. The quilt example is the one time I don't use stabilizer. So if you literally have batting, top, backing, and you're doing your quilting in the hoop, then you don't use any stabilizer, not even wash away, because you don't want to, tear against your stitching or have to submerge your quilt. But that's only available for like quilting designs that are pretty lightweight. And then washaways are specialty. Okay, one last thing about stabilizer options. There are adhesive stabilizers available. They are the same as any of these cutaway, tearaway, washaway. Of all those, there are adhesive versions, and they will have a wax paper side and then, a stabilized visible side. And you hoop those with the wax paper up. You keep the wax paper on as you hoop it, and then you score your wax paper and peel it away to reveal an adhesive side that you can use to stick a a troublesome project to, like a towel or something that doesn't go into the hoop nicely. And we will talk more about that in our last project when we talk about floating a project. So for now, that is a basic introduction to stabilizer. There's a lot of nuance that, this may not cover, and there's room for you to differ. This is just how I personally approach stabilizer, with the caveat that I always do a test, and then I see how I did. Okay, so moving on, we are going to hoop. So you will need a bit of stabilizer. I happen to have a medium weight cutaway here. How about a medium or heavyweight tearaway would be fine as well. And we are going to hoop that with our fabric. Let's go on to a little hooping demo. Okay, so let's look at your hoop. When you get your hoop out, we're going to release the inner hoop from the outer hoop by using the quick release lever there, and then pulling the inner hoop out. Now, your inner hoop looks like it's symmetric and it could go in any way, but there is a right way and a wrong way. Make sure that the Pfaff that is printed on it and the numbers are looking at you with the attachment point to the left, because this is how it's going to go onto the machine. So Pfaff has to be looking at you while the attachment point is to the left. Notice also I've got some arrows that point at each other here. So if I say, went to put this in and there was no second arrow, or there was a recycling symbol, this is upside down. Or if my arrows are pointing different ways, there's an arrow, it's wrong. Okay. We are going to layer our fabric and our stabilizer together and lay it on top of the outer ring. Like so. And I like to have more than enough of both so that they are going to overflow. I do get asked, how scant can I be with stabilizer or fabric? And, I won't tell you what to do in your own home, but I do think your stabilizing is somewhat compromised if it's not fully caught in all of the sides of the hoop. If you have a little piece and say it's shorter than the hoop and it's not caught on the bottom or top edges, I do think its stabilizing ability is a little compromised, but far be it from me to tell you totally not to do that. Okay, you may also need to back out your thumb screw a little bit to expand the outer ring to make this easier for you. You also may want to stand up. I usually can't hoop sitting down. I need a lot of leverage. And what I'll do is find one of the edges so I can feel, oh, there's the top edge. Here's this edge. And I will squeeze those together and push down. There we go. Okay, there's a corner. There we go. And I'll squeeze that corner into each other. And that helps me get, say, the opposite corner. Because a lot of the times the issue with hooping is just you've stacked a ring on top of the other ring and it just doesn't, it'll never fit. Okay, and I do a little preliminary squash in. I'm not worried that there's like a little bit of bubbling there, not yet. And I will go ahead and, oh, you can see I didn't quite catch my stabilizer. So let's unhoop, move that down a little bit. Squeeze the corner, squish, squish, squish. And push, 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 almost. There we go. Okay. And now we're going to flip our quick clamp lever closed. If it is too hard, if you're having to exert a lot of pressure here to close it, loosen your thumb screw some more, lefty-loosey, because you can break these hoops if you force that clamp when it's too hard to close. So again, continuing to test here. There we go. So a little bit of force is fine. Then I'm going to flip the hoop up, there's my circle, and check that I really did get the inner ring all the way into the outer ring. So I'm specifically looking at the back of the hoop, and I'm going to squish the inner ring even a little bit beyond the outer ring. It is deeper now than the outer ring itself by, say, a 1/16 of an inch. Anybody have a guess why I do that? I usually get a couple good guesses, usually not the right answer, but always interesting. So I hope I got some interesting ones there. The right answer is it's putting the soft stabilizer as the lowest thing in the hoop, not the plastic outer hoop that's still exposed, because this is about to sit on my machine and go like this a bunch. And so if the plastic is the lowest thing, it scratches the bed of your machine, and you'll meet people, you'll see people's machines if you're in the business long enough that are all scratched up and like shiny. And I mean, it's life, but you can keep your machine looking a little nicer longer if you always seat, that's S-E-A-T, seat the inner hoop into the outer hoop. Once I've done that, then I will concern myself with the bubbles in the fabric. So there's a little bit of poof to my fabric here. I can pull out the worst of the poof by pulling upward gently on just the fabric. You really can't pull on the stabilizer. You'll just split your hoops apart again, and the stabilizer doesn't wrinkle. Like, it looks great, so don't worry about that. So I pull upwards gently. You'll find that pulling outwards basically does nothing. Pulling the corners basically does nothing. You've got to pull on the sides. And I am pulling as little as possible while still getting the poof out of the fabric. It used to be that we would stretch a little harder. We were creating like a drum to stitch onto. But the issue is that means your fabric is stretched, and when you stitch it in a stretched position, the first thing it does when you release it from the hoop is relax. And then all your stitching that looked great in the stretched position is now a little too crunched together. So we want our fabric in a very relaxed state. Okay, once you're happy with the flatness of your fabric, we're going to tighten the rest of the way down with the thumb screw. I go finger tight, but I do feel like my grip strength is pretty strong. If you feel like your grip strength is somewhat impaired, there are, like assists you can get to help turn these, but honestly, if you can get it somewhat finger tight, it's usually okay. Usually if it doesn't fall apart, if you kind of shake it, you're okay. Okay. So now we're going to put our hoop on the machine. And for every machine, it's all the same for Pfaff. You do want to make sure your foot is up, and if you were unaware, you have a double up. You can go extra high with your press or foot up button to raise it to clear the hoop. And then we're just going to slide into the opening and push, 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 push. You'll hit a little resistance. You can either push the release lever to get a little less resistance, but honestly, I'm a bit of an animal. I just push, 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 push. Click, nice click noise. And now it doesn't come out, has to do that engage. Let me be quiet and let you hear that. Hey, there's that click. Okay, so now that the hoop is on, it's going to let me advance past the attach hoop stage, and we'll move on. Okay, so now that we're on the stitch out screen, there is a little bit of customizing that we can do as far as our view, and just checking before we get going that we understand what's going to happen. The first thing that we're probably interested in is the colors that are involved. On the icons, we have a painter's palette menu that's currently closed that I can tap that will then open up and show me the colors. This is a scrollable menu. I can also expand it, and it will show me the colors that are being expected to be used. On the 4.5, it's not closable, it's just always there, and we can see again in order. Notice the numbers on the Creative 4.5, 11, 12, 21, 22. That's how you can tell the different designs. If it starts with a 1, it's the first design. If it starts with a 2, it's the second design, and then the colors within each are the second 1 and second 2. Okay. Now, you can see that they're both listing a number and then some sort of code there. So for instance, rah 40 2590. That is a thread color brand. Specifically, this one's Robinson Anton Rayon 40. And then the specific color is 2590. And all the brands will use some sort of number code like that to distinguish colors. You don't have to do what it says. In fact, I've got blue on my machine right now instead of pink. So you can follow exactly what it says. You could go, get Robinson Anton 40, 2590. You could also look in your bin and see what sort of pinks you have that might match. Or you could just go rogue and choose your own color. In our next activity, we will talk about recoloring if you do want to pick a different brand or pick a different color. But for now, you can just do whatever you want. Guess what? Your machine can't yell at you because it doesn't know what you're doing. One thing I do find really helpful if I am going to go rogue and sort of play it by ear and pick my own colors as I go, is I want to see what part of the design I'm just going to drag that up. Oh, scooch that over somewhere. It's not in the way. There we go. If I want to be able to see the color that's currently being stitched so that I can make an informed decision about the new color I'm choosing, I like to go to ghost mode, which is either a flower or a butterfly, depending on your Creative Icon 1 or Creative Icon 2, but it will have a highlighted, say, center of a butterfly, or in this case, 2 petals are highlighted. You tap that to turn it on, and it will show you only the current color. So the current color is going to do the bottom pink flower. That way I can say, okay, well, I want that one to be orange, so I need to get orange. Really, really helpful. I just essentially always have that turned on. On the Creative 4.5, you don't have an option like that, so you just you just eyeball it, and you have to, based on the different colors there are, just kind of understand what's going on. What you both have, is a stitch count for each color, a stitch count for the total, and then how long the current color is going to take. So on the Creative 4.5, we're on stitch number 1 of 3,786 in the current color, which is what that pink box means. There's over 13,000 in the whole design, which is what the butterfly means, and then the current color is going to take 6 minutes. We've got some more stuff over here, which we'll talk about a little later. And then on the icons, we need to open up a menu. Are you getting the sense that the icons have a lot of menus that need to be open and closed? We want Stitch Out Progress. And then we can see our sort of upcoming colors are on deck. We've got how long this color will take, the total stitches in this color, and then the total stitches in the design are this flower icon over here. I think it's interesting to know where to look for the amount of stitches in a given color, because if you're down to, your last gasp of a certain color, you would say like, oh my God, do I need to stop right now and run to the store and get a new thread, or can I keep powering through? So if you go to a stitch, for instance, I think this olive green is 265 stitches is nothing. You could do that with your last gasp of thread. So you could say, no, I'm fine, I can make it. And then we'll go back. There we go, back to pink. Okay, so that's enough knowledge to be able to start embroidery. But one thing that we're going to notice right away is, hey, it's doing the first pink flower, then the first pink flower's olive green section, and then the first flower's dark green section, and then it's going to say, oh, rethread with pink, olive green, and green again. Boy, I really don't feel like changing my pink twice. I'd like it to just stitch out the pink at the same time, and then both olive greens, and then both forest greens all at the same time. You have, depending on your machine, some options to affect this. If you have a Creative 4.5, you have the most basic option, which is make monochrome or make one color. And that is accessed in this icon that shows you a bar opening another bar of options. And we can see pink, blue, pink becomes one color. So that will not stop and ask you to change colors. If you have a different machine, like a former top of the line or a current top of the line, you should have some more options. And on the icons, this is the painter's palette again. Lots of stuff in this painter's palette. And we can see sort, merge, and one color. The one color is what the Creative 4.5 has. It will not stop. It will not ask you to rethread. Everything will be blue in my case. Sort and merge are, well, more interesting, I think. So sort will put the same colors next to each other. So if I touch that, my pinks are now next to each other, my olive greens are now next to each other, and my dark greens are now next to each other. That's the first step. But guess what? It's still going to stop and ask after the first pink. It will stop as if I was planning to change colors for the second flower. But if I'm not planning, I can go ahead and hit merge. So if you have two of the same color that are next to each other, they will be merged into one block, and it will not stop and ask you in between those two parts. It doesn't reflect it here, but it won't stop. When you're done with that first pink, you go right on to the second pink. Okay, so that's color simplification. If you want to, you can choose those. And now we get to go on and actually do some stitching. We're ready to start stitching. My recommendation is that you hold on to this top thread, and then we can go ahead and press the play button and let it start stitching. And the first thing it does is cut that tail, but it helps it not eat it. So let's pause real quick and talk about preferences. First one is if your machine is stitching really, really slow or way too fast for you, we can go ahead and adjust that. On the Creative Icon 2 and the Creative Icon 1, the speed slider is a physical slider mounted on the right side of the machine past the screen. You reach around your screen to the right, and as I slide the slider, notice a bar graph appears on screen showing it filling or emptying, and that will set your speed. On the Creative 4.5 and similar models, you have a built-in speed control that's like a button. So on screen, there's this bar graph, right, where my finger's indicating, and when you tap it, it drops to half speed. Tap it again, it goes back to full speed. That bar graph is still emptying and filling. If you want lower than half speed, or say like 3/4 speed, you push and hold on the icon, and then a new menu pops up, and you can set, say, as low as possible, and that becomes your new toggle. Full as low as possible, full as low as possible. That's your speed control. Okay. You may also, if you are using the 6A foot, which is the clear plastic foot, not this one, you may also want to adjust the height of the foot. Because if you have a really thick project, the hovering foot will be sort of dragging on the thick project. And that is done, depending on your machine, in your settings. So on the Creative Icon 2, we would go to the gear in the upper right-hand corner. I think on the Creative Icon 1, that gear might be down in the bottom left. Don't quote me on that. And then when I open it, it should automatically go to embroidery settings. And then you can see that presser foot height embroidery is an option. You may have to tell, depending on your machine, you may have to tell it that you're using the 6A for that to actually become available. Looks like mine's available no matter what. And then the higher the number, the higher the foot, the lower the number, the lower the foot. And you would want to lower it if your foot was way high above the fabric and your fabric was able to do a bunch of bouncing because the foot wasn't holding it down. But neither do you want the foot to drag on the fabric. Mine's okay on this one. On the Creative 4.5, we would also go into settings, but our settings is this picture of some tools. There's a wrench and a screw. And then we've got an embroidery presser foot height that's currently not available because it thinks I want to use the 6D. I uncheck the 6D and now there's a little height available. Again, higher the number, the higher the foot, lower the number, the lower the foot. Okay, with that established, we'll go ahead and keep going. Now, what I want is for us to sew at least partially through our design. I'm not going to make you watch, but we'll pause together. So you can go ahead and pause me and get a little bit further in your design, and I'm going to go ahead and get a little further in my design, and then we'll touch base. Now, if it's not stitching at all, or it's making some sort of awful noise, you do need to stop and rethread your machine and then keep going. Now we'll talk in a little bit about how to recover from a false start or a thread break. So if you want to keep watching a little bit ahead, we'll cover that shortly. But if you want to just rethread and then start wherever you're at, that's fine. Okay, see you in a little bit. Okay, welcome back from our little pause while we both stitched out some more stuff. I've paused here. You can see it actually did go on and it was about to start my second flower without prompting me to change colors, which means that that sort and merge colors had worked. I paused here so that we can talk about tension. So I'm going to just cut my threads and take out my hoop because I'm interested in the back of the design. Now, in real life, I think there's a range of acceptable tensions. Really, the end-all, rule is you don't want to see bobbin thread on top. And so as you start stitching, you're really looking, get your eyeballs in there, and you're looking to see if you can see any white bobbin thread or whatever color your bobbin thread is coming through. If it is, then you would immediately want to catch that and stop that. If you're getting huge loops of bobbin thread, your bobbin is probably not threaded correctly. Usually, like a minor tension adjustment does not necessitate or does not create like a huge issue. If there's a huge issue, something's not threaded correctly, top or bottom, and so you need to rethread hopefully both to hopefully correct that issue. If I'm just seeing like a little bit of white somewhere in there, that's a more typical, adjust your tension type issue. When you see bobbin thread on top, what that means is that the top thread is pulling too hard and it's pulling the bobbin thread up to a visible point because, of course, our top thread and our bobbin thread are looped together to form a stitch. And so if the top thread's too tight, it will pull the bobbin thread up. You need to relax and lower that tension in order to make that relax down into the fabric. Now, when you look at your screen, depending on your machine, you will have different tensioning options. Let's start with the Creative Icon and Creative Icon 2. So if you open Stitch Out Progress, which is where we've been, you will see a 50 and a metering. And this is the active stitch technology type of thread control. And what it's meant to do is to sense the thickness of the fabric you're using and meter out more or less thread. The problem is it's not really well understood what you do with thread metering if you're having a problem. I think it's great as long as it works, but when it's not working, I understand thread tension a whole lot better and I switch back to the thread tension system. The way we do that is we go into our settings. So again, the gear in the upper right or possibly the bottom left. And then embroidery, and we can see active stitch technology on screen. Now there's two sets of columns. The white check mark and the white lettering is like default. Whenever you turn your machine off and on again, what setting do you want it to be on? Orange is temporary. So during this project only, until the machine is turned off and on again, have this setting active. So I'll do the orange checkbox. I will uncheck that because I do want active stitch technology on the next time I come back and say sew on the machine. I don't want to turn it off forever. And then I hit OK. On the Creative 4.5, you can see that we just have our regular tension icon here, it says 2.8. I know it's our regular tension icon because it shows what the Creative Icon 2 shows now, which you'll see a little better, which is 2 parentheses back to back with a line going through them. That's your tension discs with the thread going through them. And we're at 2.8. And like I said, if you're seeing bobbin thread on top, your top thread is too tight. It's pulling your bobbin thread up. You can go ahead and lower that number, say by a couple of clicks. And then you would keep going and see if it did a little better. Now, that's the hard rule is no bobbin thread on top. However, there are some ideals that we can strive for beyond that. So I flip to the back, and what I'm interested in is the satin stitching. The straight stitching, I'm not worried about. That I really will just judge by, is there bobbin thread on top? But in the satin stitching, I'm curious. I want to see some of my top thread color, but not a ton. Basically a third on each side. In fact, let me draw this with a pen so it's more visible. So if we zoomed in on my satin stitching, I would want a third on each side to be the top thread color and the center third to be the bobbin thread color. In an ideal world, you'll never have it be perfect, all the time. The reason for this is we want a little bit of insurance or assurance, either way, that our top thread is not going to let the bobbin thread show. There's a little bit extra top thread wrapping to the back. But there's not so much top thread that it's completely obscuring the bobbin thread. And then there's no point in using bobbin thread at that point. You've got so much top thread coming to the back. It's like you're not even using bobbin thread and it's extra bulky. Okay. So if you get the bulky version, if you've got a ton of top thread on the back your tension is too loose. Your top thread tension is letting that top thread relax way too far and come to the back and totally obscure your bobbin thread. If you see very little top thread, you're just at the edges, and you don't have much of a buffer there, you can loosen or lower the number on your top tension in order to relax little and let a little bit more come through and give you a little bit more of a buffer there. That's the ideal. And it's just an ideal on the satin stitching. You really can't judge fill stitches by the same measure. And so you can play with that, and then you can keep stitching and see how it does. For me, I'm basically done. We don't spend a ton of time in my classes stitching because we've got a lot of computer talk to do. We're going to keep stitching a little bit more of this design. We're not going to stitch a ton more, but I do want to go over what I promised, which is, what if my thread breaks? Okay, so we're going to continue just a little bit in our design, and we're going to simulate a thread break. So I've gone ahead and just unthreaded my needle, and I'm going to let it stitch a little bit. Oh, okay. There we go. And we'll say it took me, 10 stitches to realize, oh, it came unthreaded. So now I'm advanced in my design, and there's going to be a portion, even if I rethread here, that didn't get stitched. So I need to back up and recover from that thread break. So first thing, of course, is to rethread. And it did come all the way out of the take-up lever for me, so check that yours didn't do that either. Okay, now for the backing up. So on the Creative Icons, we have a little picture of a needle in the Stitch Out Progress menu, and it shows the needle moving, and it says Go to Stitch. We're currently on stitch number 1842. I can either tap backwards stitch by stitch, and my needle will move to match, or my hoop will move, or if I tap the center icon itself, it brings up a little number pad, and I could do some math and say, well, it probably broke at 1830 if I got to 1842. So then I'll type 1830 in, and it does a bigger jump. Now I can double check my work because I can see, did my needle get back to where there's actually stitching, and it's not far enough. So we're going to keep going. Can push and hold if I want until I'm overlapping the stitching that already exists. Yeah, maybe just a little bit further there. Okay. If I had to do a big brute force jump, like for example, the example that you started stitching and nothing happened, and so you need to back up to the beginning of the design, you can change colors by tapping these colors. So I can go back to the beginning of the first design, and whenever you swap, it always goes back to the beginning of that color. So I could really quick say reset to the beginning of the second flower just by going to the second color. All right, now I've moved myself. I'm going to go back to 1815 is about where I was at, and we just keep going. Okay, so from here, if you want to finish stitching out your design, you are welcome to pause me and go ahead and do that. I'm not going to finish stitching out my design. I've got a lot more stuff to show you, so I'm going to go on, but please feel free to pause me if you do want to finish your design. All right, welcome back from your stitch out fun, or if you are just stopping where you are like I am. We're going to move on to our second activity. And so we're going to go back to Embroidery Edit so that we can create a new design. On the icons, you have a little back button, and you tap that to go back to Embroidery Edit. Hit OK. It'll make you take your hoop off. And then on the Creative 4.5, it's a little more subtle. There's a little hoop icon in the bottom left-hand corner, and that's what you tap to go back to Embroidery Edit. There we go. Okay, now we're going to delete what we have so we can start afresh. On the icons, you can do a long touch off to the side, so not on top of either of your designs, and it will pop up a submenu that says delete all. Delete all. There we go. And then on your Creative 4.5 and similar machines, you can find your trash can with a little triangle in the bottom corner, and that means if you long press me, something new happens, and so I press and hold, and then it says delete all designs, and I hit check mark. Great. So we're back to a blank slate, but it still remembers that we wanted our 240 by 150 hoop, which is great. And what we're interested in doing this time is playing with text. Now, to add text in both machines, we're going to look for the letter A. We've got the letter A on screen for the creative icons. Tap that, and our fonts appear. And then for our Creative 4.5 folks, you need to go to your design selection, which is the 2 columns of lines at the very bottom of the page. And then as well, you want to find the A, which is right next to the butterfly. And then it pops up both your stitch alphabets and your embroidery alphabets. That's also true on the creative icons, except that they're just separated by like windows so that you don't see those stitch fonts unless you want to. I don't think you would really ever want the stitch fonts unless you really needed tiny, tiny lettering. We're going to stick with our embroidery fonts, but we are going to do some pretty small lettering for purposes of fitting more stuff in. So we want to pick one of the small numbers. The numbers next to the fonts are how tall they are in millimeters. So we want like one of the 12-point fonts. So I'll just tap that on both machines. And then both machines are going to give us a keyboard. We're going to type a short word. So I think I will do Pfaff. And I want you to notice that you have capital and lowercase letters. So starting with the icon, we've got 1 capital, and then to go to lowercase, I tap the shift button and then tap out the rest of the letters. Now pause there, don't do anything beyond that. We'll catch up our Creative 4.5 folks. So we'll do our capital P, and then I need to select lowercase. And you can see me typing out there. If I made a mistake, I've got a little trash can. Okay, so if you have a Creative 4.5 or similar, you can go ahead and hit check mark. With my Creative Icon folks, we don't have a check mark, which I do find a little confusing. All we have is a little keyboard up arrow, or on the icon 1, I think it's a keyboard down arrow, and you tap that and it collapses your keyboard. Okay, and we'll just tap that A to close that. Okay, so we both have lettering on screen, and we'll just move it up a little bit off of center. And then we're going to put another letter, another word in, excuse me. Okay, so we go back into A, and if you want a different font, go for it. Again, just pick one that is small, that's like a 12-point. And this time we're not going to close out, so we're going to type our word. I'm doing class, and I want you to pause there again, and we'll repeat over here. You do have punctuation like exclamation points in this, for instance, this number 1 category. And then for my Creative 4.5 folks, go ahead and hit check mark. And we're overlapped a little bit. We'll just spread those apart a little bit. Now what we're going to do with this second word is curve it. And that's why I needed the Creative Icon folks to not close this menu, because the only time that you can curve your lettering is right after you've typed it in. You won't get back to this menu once you collapse your keyboard. And so we needed a freeze here. Now Creative 4.5 folks will get you into the same menu, but it's after you close your lettering dialog. Once we're back onto our main editing screen, we're going to look for the 3 butterflies on a curve, and we tap that. And that's going to bring us to essentially the same thing that is now on the Creative Icon screen. Okay, so jumping back to the Creative Icon, we first need to say, I want a curve. So we're going to select this ABC on a curve, and we get to choose the shape that we want. Do we want it curved like a smile, curved like a rainbow? And then we also have severity of curve in here. I think I'll do a smile. I'll do a medium severity smile. In Creative 4.5, folks, you can do the same. Yours has these full circles, but it's still showing you like around the outside is a rainbow, around the inside is a smile. Don't go crazy with the heart and the star and stuff. That's a little too wild, but you could do this like soft S curve. I think I'll just do a smile on this one as well. There we go. Okay, and it looks a little weird to start, especially on the Creative 4.5. What's happening here is our spacing is really weird. It's spacing everything even amounts apart. And that is controlled in a couple ways. So first of all, we've got a icon that shows box, dot, box, dot, box, and they're all in a line. And the boxes are all evenly spaced on the line. If I tap that, it opens up a submenu with like justify left and justify right options. So stack them all leftward next to each other, stack them all rightward next to each other. Now, how does it determine where the right side and the left side of the circle is? Doesn't really matter. Either one would do. And then you have this like magnet ability. It's really strong. Be careful. I go pretty small clicks at once, but this is going to determine how close they are together. So I'm spreading them apart here. And again, I'm not dragging that slider because I know how crazy this can go. So now they're getting further apart. If I wanted the curve to be tighter or looser, more severe or less severe, I can grab these control points, is what they're called, and bring that curve either bigger or smaller. And so it'll have a less severe curve at this point. The same thing done on the Creative Icon would be, we've picked our smile, and then we are going to go to the same spacing option, which is this, square, line, square, line, square. And then we get the same options, spacing, justify left, justify right, and then let's close this out. There we go. So we've got balanced left, middle, right, and then distance between, which is like a magnet as I think of it. There we go. That's a little bit too much. So I'm probably going to pick, I'm boring, I'm going to pick justify center, and then I'll scooch them a little closer together. And again, you can change the severity of the curve by dragging these corners. Woo! Oh yes, very fancy. I have a really severe curve now there. Back that off. So play with that for a little bit. Again, don't worry about creating your magnum opus. We're just playing around with some of this. Go ahead and play with the justify and the curvature, and then still don't close anything because we got a couple more things to check out. I'll give you, time to pause, and then we'll keep going. Okay, so you've played with your lettering. The last thing I wanted to show you is this icon that shows 3 boxes on a curve, and they're all sitting perfectly vertical, but they're moving up and down the curve like a little climber going up a mountain. And if we tap that, all the letters sit upright. Okay, well that opens a submenu, follow shape, fixed angle. So we can tap sit upright versus follow the curve, and you can tap between those to get a feel for that. On our Creative 4.5 folks, you also have a picture like that. It's got these 3 boxes on a curve, and it just toggles between them, sit upright or curve. I think of the sit upright as like cars on a Ferris wheel, where the cars don't tilt with the curvature, they just travel around in the same orientation. I like it when it curves with the curve, so I'm going to keep it on that. And then we've got a few more options on the Creative 4.5. We've got this option to lay the lettering down so it becomes like an acrostic poem almost. Really quite odd, honestly. Can't think of a ton of options for why I would do that except for embroidering an acrostic poem. And then finally, we've got basically quick changing the curvature of your design. Instead of making that circle bigger and smaller, you could just say, well, put the lettering on the line, above the line, or below the line, and they're essentially moving onto a bigger or smaller curve. So I'll just keep mine on top of the line where it was. Okay, so those are our curvature options. Now you can go ahead and close your keyboard if you're on a Creative Icon. And then you can close this submenu with the check mark if you're on a Creative 4.5. Okay, so the Creative Icon folks got to center their word class because they had an option to center. We didn't on the Creative 4.5. We had to crowd left or crowd right. And so now I would end up rotating it if I wanted it to be more even, more level. There we go. And you know, if you decide you want to change something about it, let's just reset that. You can go back into curvature and you can keep messing with it. I'm curious, so if I space them all, can I? No, see, I can't do that. Okay. Well, anyways. Okay. And we've got that. Okay. The last thing I want us to do in our combined design is add a small, just like embellishment design. And I showed us last time on the Creative Icon how to preview the size of the design. I didn't do that on the Creative 4.5, which was my mistake. So we'll catch that now. We're going to go to our embroidery designs, butterfly, and then small designs because I know that I want them to be small. And then the way that we know the size of these is we push the question mark and then the item, and it tells you this one's, whoa, really small, 16 by 19 millimeters. That's less than 2 centimeters both ways. Oh, what do I want? The scissors are pretty cute. Let's do these scissors. Great. Okay. Pfaff class with a scissors. And on our Creative Icon, we will also go grab a small design. Let's check out birds and insects. Whoa, that's a big bird. Yes, I could resize it, but I'm hoping to find like a miniature. There might even be a miniature section here. Mini, there we go. Oh yeah, any of these. That is a cute little flower. Let's do that. Okay, got a mini design. And as you can see, I'm starting to make like a little logo. I'm putting the design in the middle of the lettering. Okay, so now that we have our mini designs brought in, we're going to try to create like a little attractive logo by, say, framing the design with the lettering. And you can see what I'm doing here, you know, just trying to put the curvature on the bottom, etc. You can do what you like. But if you have a Creative Icon or an Icon 2, I want you to specifically slightly overlap your design with your lettering. If you have a Creative 4.5 or similar, you can just hang out and create whatever sort of attractive design you like. Okay, Creative Icon folks, the reason we're doing this is I want to show you how you can relayer things. The way it's going to stitch out here is Pfaff is going to be first because it was the first icon, or excuse me, the first design I put in. Class is second because it was the second design I put in, and the flower is third. So when it stitches out, the flower will be on top of the lettering. But let's say I wanted to see, well, what would it look like if I reversed that and I want the class to be on top of the flower? If you have a Creative 4.5 and like machine, you just have to, unfortunately, delete and re-enter your designs so that you re-enter them in the order you want to stitch. But on the icons, you can go to this little layering tab that has document, document, document. And then you can grab these by the little, I don't know, line hamburger option and move them around. So the lower down they are, the later they stitch. So the third thing to stitch, which would mean it's on top of the other two, will be class. And now we can look at it and, I mean, it's subtle, but we could demo which one we want to cover the other. That's that layers tab for you. Okay. Now let's talk about grouping. So let's say we've found the perfect setup for our design, and now I want to make the whole thing centered, or I want to resize the whole thing. Each of these designs is treated individually right now, and that's inconvenient. So we're going to group all the designs together. For Creative Icon folks, it's done in the same tab, which is the layering tab. And you can see the option to select all and then group. Now, if you only wanted to group a few of them, you would have used select multiple, and then you can tap the ones that you want to group. And notice they're all on the same layer now, and we'll do some editing in a second, but let's catch up with the Creative 4.5. With the Creative 4.5 and like machines, you use what I consider the most nebulous icon on the machine. I'd say it's the hardest to understand. It's this arrow pointing at some little boxes. Basically, this is select multiple. So if I tap this, I can then tap other designs. Unselect, reselect. Oh, it's not active anymore. There we go. And so I've got two designs selected here, but I want to select all. So I'm going to push and hold on this top icon because it has a little triangle in the corner, which means push and hold does something different. And I happen to know that push and hold means select all. And now they're all highlighted. Now I go down to the group icon, which is 3 boxes surrounded by a square, just like that. And same as our Creative Icon, we now have a grouping. If I regret my choices later, I can just hit ungroup, no problem. Okay, so go ahead and group your designs, and then you'll see how you can now use your editing functions like move to center the whole design on the center of the hoop, or resize, or rotate all of it. I'm going to go ahead and do my centering example. If you feel like resizing or rotating, that is fine, but I do want this design to still stay relatively small because we're going to do a couple activities with it. We want to tile it in our hoop. Couple more things that we're going to do with our design. I promised we would talk about recoloring. So for instance, if I wanted to envision my lettering in a different color, or even just parts of the extra design in a different color. How do I do that? So on our Creative Icons, we're looking for our Painter's Palette icon on the sidebar. And it's going to slowly add up, list all of the colors, and then I can select a color. Now, the top one I've tapped is just the P, and I know that because PFAFF, that exactly lines up with 5 slots of this greenish color. But I want to change all of the Pfaff letter at once. What I'm going to do then is select the top green, or one of the greens, and then I hit select same. And it will automatically find the rest that are that same color, even if they weren't next to each other, even if they were further down the list. And now, as a unit, I can say change color. Okay. Now, if you don't use Robinson Anton Rayon 40, which, for instance, I do not, you have the option to change to a different color, a different thread brand. For instance, I have Isocord on my machine right now, and specifically I have Isocord 4240, and that's printed on the tag. So I'm going to go to the Robinson Anton Rayon icon here, and then Robinson Anton, select, and then scroll through, going upwards to the eyes. It's a lot of M's. Oof. And okay, we want I-cord Poly 40. Why isn't it Isocord? I have my theories. Isocord is technically a Bernina brand, and so I think there's a little bit of brand infighting going on with the misspelling of Isacord, but that is our Isacord. It's always been called iCord as long as the Creative Icon 2 has been out. If you have a Creative Icon 1, I'm sorry, you can't pick a different brand. You can just pick from a rainbow of colors that is devoid of branding. And so you would just pick from essentially your version of this rainbow. Okay, so we've picked our Isacord Poly 40, and I'm looking for color 4240. And you have, this is actually scrollable. You can see I've scrolled all the way up into the 4000s, and we can select 4240, which is showing me that it's, like a light sky blue. And then this number is showing me what I selected. What I am finding is it doesn't accept inputs to this typing. I had to scroll all the way to 4240 because it wouldn't accept a typed in number. I'm not sure if I've confused it in some way. Maybe if I turned it off and on again, it would do a little better, or if it's only searchable within certain brands. But I had to scroll all the way through here to 4240. But now it's paid off. My colors are now showing the color I'm planning on using, and it's Isacord Poly 40, 4240. Okay, go ahead and play with that if you have your Creative Icon, and then Creative 4.5 folks will do it on your machine. Okay, what we're looking for is this little thread icon off to the right. And you can see our list, and just like I was saying on the Creative Icon, every single letter is differentiated by its own color. You could have a rainbow, red, orange, yellow, green, blue for each individual letter. We also have a select same color on this machine. We'll tap the first, and then this icon becomes available that shows two pink squares with an arrow pointing at them, which would be select everything that's the same color, which is all the lettering. And now I can hit my little rainbow icon and pick a different color. Now we don't have the option to choose a different thread brand in here. Check. You can see the thread manufacturer listed here in our settings, but they only give you two brands, Sulky and Robinson Anton. And again, there's some like brand politics being played, and Pfaff's not the only one who plays those games. So it is what it is. If you have Isacord, say, and your machine is going to tell you color numbers in Robinson Anton, you can look up a thread chart online or a conversion chart. Usually you Google something like Robinson Anton Rayon 40 to Isacord Polyester 40 conversion chart, and it'll tell you what the number equivalents are. That said, I would only ever do that if I was trying to exactly duplicate a sample for some reason. Otherwise, I would say, oh, it's a sunflower yellow and a sky blue, and then I would go find whatever I liked of those colors. So you don't have to follow exactly what it's prescribing for you. Okay, so that is color changing for you. From here, we are going to save this design because, we've created a masterpiece, let's say, and even if you don't think you've created a masterpiece, you will pretend that you love it so that we can save it. Saving is in different locations for different machines. So starting with my Creative Icons, if you have a Creative Icon 2, you have a little heart that says save in the bottom left-hand corner. If you have a Creative Icon 1, you have a heart that is right below your screen. Either way, you tap that, and it says, okay, we're saving to my Sonnet. If you have a USB stick plugged in, half of this will say My Sonnet, half of it will say USB stick, and then you get a choice. I don't have a USB stick plugged in, so don't worry about it. Then it has two options. Save current state. No, we'll come back to that. We'll talk about that. And save file. We do want to save the file, and I get a chance to name it something more interesting than new design. I like to name mine logical things, like Pfaff class for a design that says Pfaff class. Okay. Now, be aware, even though it says My Sonnet, I'm not actually on the internet right now, and so it's not saving to My Sonnet, the cloud-based saving section, whatever. My Sonnet means several different things. It can mean the paid software, and it can mean this free cloud-based storage. When you're not connected to the internet though, you're just saving to your machine, even though it says My Sewnet. It's going to be on the machine's memory, and we can go ahead and hit save there. Okay. Now, while I work with the Creative 4.5 folks, you can go ahead and turn your machine off and on again to simulate going to bed, getting up, and then having to retrieve this design. Okay, Creative 4.5 folks, to save, we're going to go to this icon in the upper right that shows an arrow pointing into a folder. And then we get options for save to favorite designs, save to a different filing system, or save to a USB stick. I'm fine with this going in my favorites. And I also get the chance to name it something more interesting than New Design 1. And delete all. And we'll call it Pfaff. Oh, gotta spell it right. Pfaff, there we go. And then I hit check mark. Okay, and then we'll hit check mark to confirm. And then same as the other folks, you're going to turn your machine off and on again as well. Okay, so we are back as if it's a new day. And of course, our embroidery units are going to want to calibrate, so we'll let them do that. It's beautiful. Okay, so how do we retrieve our design? Creative Icon folks, we'll start with you. We go to our folder icon here, and on the Creative Icon 1, I can't remember if you also have a folder icon or perhaps a heart. Something is going to look designy. Let's hope it's a folder icon. And look, the very first thing, the only thing on here is Pfaff class, and I can just push and hold to bring that back in. And then on the Creative 4.5, we're going to go into our design selection columns of lines. And then remember, we put this into our favorite butterflies, and there it is. Okay, and because it's a brand new day, the machine no longer remembers that we're using our 240 by 150 hoop, so go ahead and pick that out of the crowd. And then we'll have a little aside here for the Creative Icon 2 folks. Don't back out of this screen once you've picked your hoop, and I'll show you this hoop scan function. Okay, so in this example, we're going to show our Creative Icon 2 folks how to use the hoop scan to line up with a center point on your fabric. Now, we'll do this with the Creative Icon 1 folks and the Creative 4.5 folks in a different way a little later. So if you have either of those machines, this will be a great time to maybe go get like a cup of coffee or something, and we'll come to back together shortly. Okay, so I'm drawing us a center point, and this is where we want the center of our design to go. Why? Oh, I don't know. Maybe you are putting this on a polo shirt and you want it, properly, right? Like on the, the breast pocket location. And so you've gone ahead and marked where the center of the design should be so that it looks right. Okay, so I've drawn on my chalk mark and I attach my hoop. And then best practice is to remove the foot, and that's not so hard to do, just pop that off, and unthread the thread, because if you have a tail dragging around, it'll show up on the scan. And it's not terrible. I mean, sometimes I'm lazy and I don't unthread it, but you do see it on the scan. Then we're gonna say start hoop scan on screen. And then the okay is again, because if your coffee is right there, you don't want it to get bumped. So you're going to move everything that's in the way of the arm. And in my case, probably need to scooch this way. So please remove the hoop. Yes, these are very bossy. They will tell you when they want their hoop, when they don't want their hoop. Okay. Let's try it again. Hoop back on and start hoop scan. Touch OK. Okay, let's do it. Now, if you can't see it, the hoop is moving. It's doing these passes like it's mowing the lawn across the hoop. There we go. Okay. And then notice the background has automatically changed to be the scanned hoop. Now, I think they could improve their grammar here. It's the hoop that has been scanned with a double N-E-D, but I won't quibble. And then we just close hoop options, and you can see this is very faintly my hoop with my bright yellow chalk mark. Now, if you feel like you don't get good contrast with this background image, I have had occasions with certain fabrics where turning the lights brighter or dimmer on the machine seemed to help the visibility. And that would be done in your settings, machine, LED work light, and you can turn that up and down. Okay, so here's why I think this is cool, is now I can move up onto my center point like this. Now, it's not perfectly centered because honestly, I'm just eyeballing what's the center of this square on the center of that dot, but it gets me in the zone. And then we'll go do with everybody else the precisest of the precise positioning where we truly can match center to center. Okay. If you went to get a cup of coffee, go ahead and come back. We're going to come all back together now. And we are going to go on to stitch out. So we'll hit OK on both. You can go ahead and just hit OK on those settings. And remember, for Creative 4.5 folks, it's the butterfly with a needle and a little play button. And we're sharing a hoop here. This keeps happening. It yells at me for not having a hoop, and then it says, well, you better try again. So then I have to try again. Okay. There we go. Okay, so what we are going to do together is what's called precise positioning. Precise positioning is used in the case that you need your design to be in a specific spot marked on your fabric. To use the example from the Creative Icon 2 little example I just did, let's say you're putting this logo, Pfaff Class, on a polo shirt, and you've gone ahead and marked the center of the breast pocket that you're going to put this design on. And it has to be in the right place to start because there's not going to be any cutting your t-shirt to make it look centered if it's not centered. So you really need it to be on. We all have a option called precise positioning. We'll start actually with the Creative 4.5. And this is an icon in the bottom right-hand corner that shows a butterfly with a crosshair and a little movement icon. And if you haven't already, you need to mark a crosshairs on your fabric with a yellow or white chalk. And we'll pause real quick and I'll show you what I have marked right now. So just so you know what I'm referencing, so I've got a crosshairs, and notice I did put it in the upper part of the hoop because we want space down here as well. We're going to do 2 positioning exercises in this case. So I've got a crosshairs up here, and then you can go ahead and grab a ruler or other straight edge, and I am specifically going to put a crooked line on my fabric. Just like that. And we'll come back to that and I'll explain what that's supposed to represent when we get there. Okay, so now we can go ahead and do our precise positioning. We're going to show you first on the Creative 4.5, and then we'll give everybody else a pretty good idea, but then I will go show my Creative Icon owners the slight differences in the screen. Okay, hoops on, and we are going to this little butterfly with a crosshairs and a movement icon. And it opens a new menu. And you can see how it's split into category 1, category 2. And these are tasks, essentially. And the task always starts the same way. The first bubble on the top is choose a spot in the design that you are trying to align to a physical spot on the hoop. And you can see it shows a little crosshairs, just like the crosshairs you see here. So in our case, we want the center of the design to match with the center that I've marked on the hoop. Okay, now there's a little weirdness going on with this curvature where it's actually showing me like more space down here. So I might decide that I don't think it's centered, but you know what? It's totally ignoring that. That's fine. I think that is definitely centered between the two sets of letters, even though this box is weirdly large. Now I can zoom in if I need a little closer look at that, but that's good. So I've picked the spot on the screen that I want, which is the center. Now I go into step 2, which is assign this spot in the design a spot on your fabric. So we are matching crosshairs to crosshairs, and I get a movement icon. Yes, it's a little agonizing. You can do quick movements, but it's a little iffy. Okay, so you can see as I'm getting closer, see how the hoop is moving? So it's showing you exactly where the needle is going to go down. And as I get closer, I can fine tune with my arrow keys. And I keep checking with my needle down to make sure the needle's actually entering where I think it's going to. And in class, I'm pretty demanding. I really sit there and make the students really line up with that crosshair. So please feel free to pause me and be pretty exacting with this. Okay. Yay. All right, real quick, we'll look at the Creative Icon 2, and you'll say, oh, this looks really, really similar, but just in case there's any doubts. Okay, precise positioning for us is down here at the bottom, has words, precise positioning. And even on the Creative Icon 1, I do believe it says precise positioning at the bottom. Okay, and instead of having that category 1, category 2 with a sub step in between, this is just 1, 2, 3, 4 in order. The Creative Icon 1, I believe, still does have them stacked in a quadrant, and I'm happy to be proven wrong. But either way, it's still going to have some sort of progression to it. This is really nice. This even says step 1 on screen. I'm not used to this fanciness. So again, I'm going to choose a quick select of centered. Now, I could pick somewhere else. I can drag this cursor around, and we'll do that in our second activity. But for now, I'll do that quick select. And then I go to step 2, which is assign this spot on screen a spot on the fabric. And because we had done that scan hoop projection, excuse me, that scan hoop sort of alignment, I'm close. I'm closer than I was. So I can do some last minute adjustments here. Super close. Okay, perfect. So I'm centered now. And so wherever you're at, on whatever machine, you can go ahead and hit check mark. And this is why I needed us to have a small design, because if you put your mark too high or your design was too big, you'll reach a point where you've shoved your design out of bounds. And if that's the case, go ahead and mark your crosshairs a little bit lower, or more left or more right or whatever, so that you can fit it on your hoop. There we go. And now we're ready to go on both of those. I do want to go ahead and stitch this out so that you can see how it aligns. I am going to make it monochrome because I don't want it to bug me with changing colors. So I open up my palette and I hit this one color, or on the Creative 4.5, I go to my more options, monochrome. There we go. Okay. So go ahead and pause me if you want to stitch out, and I am going to stitch this out. All right, welcome back. So I have gone ahead and finished my first design, Pfaff class. You can see that looks nice. And now we're going to go on and do our second alignment practice with precise positioning with a little bit of a twist. So the first example we did was matching a center point to a center point. The second example will be to match 2 points to 2 points on a design, or excuse me, on your fabric. So we're going to specifically line up the word Pfaff with this line here. A good example of when you would actually do this would be, say, putting lettering on like a stripy fabric, or putting lettering again, you know, like on a sweatshirt, and you've marked what straight across should be. And now you just need to make sure that you put it on correctly, because, you know, it's hard to hoop things straight. You've pre-marked your straight line, but maybe you did a really bad job hooping it, like I did here, so that your line is completely crooked. It can be a little maddening to keep trying to hoop things perfectly straight and keep messing with it. So eventually, if you get it close, you can just sort of say, okay, I'll just adjust, you know, on screen to match my less than perfect hooping. So that's what we're going to do here. We're starting with the Creative 4.5 again, and we're going to go back to precise positioning. And we are going to start back at step 1 on number 1, which is pick a point on the design. And in this case, I'm going to pick the bottom left corner of the P, because that's what I want to sit on the line. So I can either drag or use my arrow keys to get to the bottom of the P. Now you can zoom in, but as you zoom in on a center point. Let me try to move the whole, let's go down to here real quick. So I'm going to step 2 real quick, purely so I can move the design to more of a center point. Then I'll go back to step number 1. And now when I zoom, I should have a much better chance of seeing where I'm putting my crosshairs. There we go. And now I can pretty accurately put that crosshair right at the bottom left-hand corner of the P. Okay. So I've picked where on the design I'm interested in aligning. Now I go to step 2, and I want to put this on that line. I'll zoom out so that I can do some brute force dragging here to get me close. And I think I'm going to be really close to going out of the hoop. Oh, actually, I've got some wiggle room. That's good. Okay, close. And again, use your needle up, needle down to check your work. Now, to me, on this line, it doesn't really matter where that left-hand corner is, but in the real world, you probably would also have marked like a center point or a left or right mark. Close. There we go. Okay, so there's the bottom left corner of the P on the line, but it's going to stitch across straight, and then the F is going to be way floating above the line. So now we need to get the F aligned. This is where we finally get to go to the second set of steps, back to step 1 of category 2, which is pick a second spot on the design that you're interested in aligning. And let's see what zooming can get me here. Get me pretty close. And then move my cursor up. There we go. Okay, so I've picked my spot on the screen, which is the bottom of the right-hand F. And then I go to the last step, which is pick where you want this part of the design to go. Now it's going to anchor the first part of the design. It would be silly if it didn't, because then you would undo what you had just done. So it's anchored that first part. And now that we have an anchor, we're not really moving, we're actually rotating around a fixed point, which is why you now see a degrees instead of a movement type response. And I'm going to turn this clockwise so I know that I'm using this right hand arrow. And if you don't know that, you just guess and check. And you'll see on the hoop itself that slowly but surely my needle is crawling towards that line. Ooh, right on. Maybe a couple more clicks. Yep, right there. Okay, so now we've got the Creative 4.5 aligned, and if I hit check mark, oh, wants me to raise my needle, that's fair. There we go. It moves to the start of the design. Let's zoom to hoop. And you can see I now have a curvature, not a curvature, excuse me, a tilt to my lettering that matches the tilt of the line. Okay, Creative 4.5 people, now's your chance for a coffee break. And Creative Icon folks, we're going to do that on our screen. Okay, so I've got my hoop on, and I'm going to go back into precise positioning. And we are going to start back at step 1, which is bring your cursor to a point on screen, and I'm going to try to accurately put my cursor on the bottom left of the P. And this exercise works best with lettering that doesn't have fancy curves at the bottom. Okay, there, we'll choose that. And then the second step is pick where this spot is going to go on the hoop. And we're going to do some dragging because I have a long way to go. There we go. It's close. Ooh, really close. Good enough? Okay, then we go on to the third step, which is pick another spot that you want to align. And I want this on the bottom of the F. And then I go to my fourth option, which is pick a physical spot on the hoop for this second part of the design. And that first spot is anchored, so we are now rotating on a fixed point. I go clockwise to rotate this direction, and the hoop is slowly moving. There we go. Okay, and my needle is now piercing the line here as well, so that I know that I have accurately placed the bottom of the entire word on that line. And we can go ahead and hit OK. Okay, so Creative 4.5 folks, come on back from your coffee break. We now all have our design aligned to a tilt, and I just want to stitch out the Pfaff, which conveniently is the first part of my stitch out. So I'm going to stop it once I have that Pfaff, and we'll look at it and we'll see, oh yes, I have a Pfaff on a line. So I'll see you when that's done. Okay, so we finished our Pfaff. And now we can see that it is indeed on the line, which is really cool. I love precise positioning. It works really, really well. Okay. So before we close out or anything, I want to do one last thing with this activity, which is we're going to talk about saving a current state. What that means is you're halfway through your design. We're on stitch number 1165, and maybe we get a call, and we have to go pick up the kids, and maybe we're getting called in for some emergency babysitting, and we know we're not making it back today to finish this. So we're going to go ahead and turn the machine off, pack it up, but I am in a specific spot, and I've got some specialty changes I've made. Stuff like precise positioning, it's not attached to the saving of the design. And so when you come back to it, it will pull this design back in, in a regular position and like not tilted. And so we want to save exactly the state that the machine is in right now so that we can come back to it later. So what we're going to do on the Creative Icon 2 is press Save Current. On the Creative Icon 1, it's possible that you also have to, I think you have to push your heart again that's down below your screen. And then remember there was an option for Save Current State. So either of those, something that says Save Current State, you might have to access it with a little heart right there. And then hit OK. For Creative 4.5 folks, we are going to go to this icon here, which is the little bar showing more dots coming out. And we want to go to the Put in Folder stitch. It's Save Current Stitch or Current State. Okay. Now we're going to do exactly what I threatened, which is you have to go babysit and you're going to turn your machine off and then you're going to turn it back on. So go ahead and turn your machine off and on. And then if your screen comes up with an option to resume where you were, I want you to say no, because that's a cheat and I want us to do it the hard way, which isn't even hard. Go ahead and let it calibrate. Okay, Creative 4.5 folks, you can go ahead and follow me. So we're back on our editing screen and we need to retrieve our current state. That is in this icon that shows you opening more icons on the right. And then you have an up arrow coming out of a folder with a needle, which should sound very familiar. This is Retrieve Current State. And it'll have me put the hoop on. And sure enough, it's right back where we were. I had not run the Creative 4.5, so it's not on a different stitch, but it did remember the tilts that we had. Okay, now on our creative icons, like I said, if it has a little message about wanting to resume, I want you to hit no, or yeah, cancel, so that you can see that even if it didn't give you that message, you still have an option here, continue from saved state. I think on the creative icon it says resume saved state, but it's in the same position on this welcome screen. Continue from saved state. It's gonna, oh, I should have removed the foot. My bad. Okay, yeah, I did not like me having that hoop on. There we go. So it is back in its tilted position. And it's on the same stitch, which is 1,165. So it's exactly back where I needed it to be. Too cool. Now, if you wanted to back up a couple of stitches, because we did use a thread cut there, I showed you guys on the creative icon earlier how it's just this go-to stitch, and I neglected to mention for my Creative 4.5 folks, you have the same thing, just not words, which shows a little needle hopping around, and you've got pluses and minuses, and you can scooch around, and if you tap the icon, you also get the ability to type in a stitch number. So same thing. Okay, so that is what I wanted to do with this activity. To wrap up this activity, I just want to show you some stuff on the back of this design. So, ta-da, here it looks. And then on the back, I'm betting your guys' looks the same. You've got, a lot of threads back here. And that was what I was mentioning with sometimes you want to turn off all the thread cuts, especially on small lettering, packed in close proximity, all these little tails can get to be a lot. And, I know that it gets kind of bulky down here. You'll get these little tail tangles. And unfortunately, there's not really a way to make the machine stop doing that. It's a function of using the thread cutter, that it does a little tangle the next time it starts sewing. So the only solution is to turn off your cuts, and then it'll be very clean back here, and you'll have some threads to trim on this side where you'll clip the little jumps in between the letters, but it's usually not a big deal. Okay, the other thing I want to show you is I would like you to admire how smooth my fabric is. And it's probably smoother than yours. Not because I have a superiority complex. I just forgot to tell you guys ahead of time my secret to getting really nice flat lettering. Because no matter how much you stabilize stuff like lettering, it's just so dense in here that often you'll get these little crinkles in the corners that you just can't get rid of, no matter how heavy the stabilizer you're putting down. So there is a secret weapon. I'm gonna unhoop this, and let's do a little bit of trimming here, because I've got some stuff to show you there as well. So this is cutaway, and when you cut cutaway, a lot of people will cut it from this angle, like this. This is scary, because the bottom blade is doing who knows what down there. And guaranteed everyone will have a time where they'll cut into their project and be forever scarred from that experience. So I would say the safer option is to flip up like this, and then you can pull against your stitching to figure out where the stitching is. And then I cut with a buffer. Remember that cutaways, you want to leave a little like 1/4 inch buffer to maintain their efficacy. And as I cut this, you will get to see my secret weapon in here. Now, if I get to a point where I really can't get under there, I will go back to cutting with the bottom blade hidden, but I will usually get my fingers under there, making sure that the fabric is really out of the way. And I am doing a pretty hack job here. You'll have to forgive me. There we go. All right. And then we'll just cut off the majority of the rest of this. Okay. All right, so in the real world, I would go around and neaten this up and, cut out a little bit closer while leaving the buffer. But this is good enough for you to see my secret weapon. This is woven fusible interfacing. It comes as a stabilizer from embroidery manufacturers, but it also is just a sewing interfacing. You might be familiar with Pellon Shapeflex SF101. That's exactly what I'm talking about. What it is a muslin with glue dots on the back, and you fuse it onto your fabric. And I did this really quick. Normally you can't peel it off like that. So I just needed to iron it a little longer, and then it really does fuse onto your fabric really tight. And the reason I think it's so effective is the fusing. I think it really makes your quilting cotton weights into more of a canvas weight. And more than anything, it takes away those crinkles that you can get in the corners of your letters. It is my absolute favorite thing. And that's also what I was talking about when I said you can cover up your embroideries. If you wanted to cover up, your cutaway edge, you can use another layer of this and fuse it on top, and then it's covered. Okay, so we're going to go on to activity 3. This is a good time for another break. And when you come back, we're going to want another piece of fabric, and then a smaller scrap of another color, say like a 5" by 5" square, let's say. And we're going to do some fun and unique stuff to wrap up this mastery. All right, so we are going to reset our machines for our last activity. So same as before, we're going to go back to Embroidery Edit and delete all. Notice this message that says leaving embroidery stitch out will, reset adjustments. That's what's telling you that precise positioning is not permanent. You lose it when you leave precise positioning. Or excuse me, when you leave stitch out. And same as before, delete all. Okay, so our last activity is going to be playing with some of the like extra sort of special fun parts of the machine. We're going to specifically play with the shape creator or applique creator functions on the machines. I say both because on the Creative 4.5 and similar machines, it's really a shape creator that you're playing with, whereas the Creative Icons have what's called applique creator, which I think just skips a step. But we'll start with the Creative 4.5, and we're going to pull in a sewing stitch. So we're going to go to this A heart B with a little needle on it, and I specifically want a satin stitch, or I would accept a blanket stitch. So anything that you would say is a typical applique stitch. So for instance, I have found a nice blanket stitch. So to start with Shape Creator on the Creative 4.5, we are going to go into our sewing stitches. So we want to go to A heart B down here. And this is the sewing stitches from the sewing side. And I want to go to our satin stitch section. So I went to my stitch selection, satin, and then, I'll do this diamond shape. That's fun. And I just need the one, honestly. I guess if I was feeling extra fancy, maybe I could alternate diamond with some other shape. I don't know, a fancy leaf. Sure. Okay, so we'll do that. Then we'll hit check mark. Now we're going to put this design into a shape. And we go to our little butterflies on a curve, which is how we did our lettering. And I will pick the heart. I've got one iteration of my design. You can see it says one butterfly down here, and sure enough, the screen is 1. I am going to increase this number until the designs go all the way around the heart. And there is some finagling to be done. Like you can see, I used a kind of a long design, and so it doesn't turn those corners really well of the heart. If I had done an individual, I bet it would work a little better. So here's the guess and check part. We're going to go back and pick a different, we're just not going to do the 2 stitches. So we go back into stitch, and this time I won't be greedy. I'll just do one leaf shape, into Shape Creator, click the heart, and this should corner a little better. So increase the number of stitches. I'm just guess and checking here. I don't know how many I'm, oh, wow, that was pretty good guess and check. And notice they crowd together the more I add, and I am trying to make it essentially unbroken. So we'll see how crowded we can get. There we go. That looks pretty darn good to me. Okay, so I have essentially made a shape out of satin stitching. If I wanted a different heart, essentially, I have some control points here that can change the size, and somewhat you can warp the shape of the heart. Well, I suppose I messed up the density of my stitching, but I'm pretty close. Well, I'll just do one more. Okay, that'll be fine. And check mark. Okay, so that's the Creative 4.5. The Creative Icons, I would say, have a little bit of an easier time because they actually have a thing called Applique Creator. And this will actually put cut lines in for doing applique. On Shape Creator on the Creative 4.5, you need to pre-cut your shape. Usually what I'll do is create 2 of those hearts, one with a straight stitch, one with the satin stitch, and put the straight stitch one underneath the heart one, or the satin stitch one, so that the straight stitch stitches first and shows me where I'm supposed to cut. And that's essentially what you'll see with Applique Creator. And then once you see that done, you should be able to then say, okay, I need another straight stitch line. I'll put it under my satin stitch line if you're using a Creative 4.5. Okay, so let's grab the same heart, dingbats or basic. So we're in Applique Creator and we've got the circle and the star I've tapped, and I choose a heart. And the reason I said this is easier is they have some presets for if you just want to satin stitch all the way around, here you go. It's this all the way around arrow, and I can even choose my little like leaves that I liked. And there's other choices as well. If I want to do essentially the same thing that I did with Shape Creator, I do have the option to add individual stitches and then, tap them in, add them in. So let's say I wanted to do the straight stitch example where I need to add in a cut line. So I've put in a straight stitch, but it needs to go all the way around. And so I need to actually add a bunch. I've got one straight stitch somewhere along this line. And this is going to be very hard to tell, but I need to somehow figure out how to fill this space. It's going to be very hard. Genuinely, I think you would have to exit Applique Creator and check your work, because once you exit Applique Creator, you will just see not just the shape, but actually what stitches are going to be happening. Okay, I guess I basically was able to do it. That would be how you create the cut line on like the Creative 4.5. You have to add in a bunch of straight stitching. But like I said, in Applique Creator, it's a little easier because we are just going to go all the way around with, say, my circles. Or you also have lettering outlines. Maybe we'll do a P for Pfaff. Let's do P for Pfaff. Perfect. Okay. And then you can resize as well. Okay. All right. So pause me if you need to go ahead and make a shape in Shape Creator. If you want to do the applique activity with me, you will need, if you have a Creative 4.5 or Creative Sensation or Creative Performance, you'll need to have a copy of your shape that is just made out of straight stitches. And you do have to add that straight stitch in, just like I added that decorative stitch in. If you have a Creative Icon, it's going to do that for us. On the Creative 4.5, folks, if you don't want to do that second shape of straight stitch, you could just practice doing your shape on just a base fabric. That is totally fine. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you now have a applique shape that you're happy with. And here's the setup that I'm going to do, and I think that you should do as well, which is I have a layer of stabilizer hooped, but no fabric in my hoop. And the reason we're doing this is I want to show you how to float a project, which is where you don't put your project in the hoop. Now, something has to be hooped. You never can have nothing hooped. So in this case, it's the stabilizer. But then I am going to float my fabric on top of it, laying it across the hoop. Like so. Okay, this is where that adhesive stabilizer I mentioned a while ago would come in handy. But even if you didn't have adhesive stabilizer, which personally, it's not my favorite, it's harder to tear or wash away. It's very expensive. So if you're not using adhesive stabilizer like I don't, it's okay. You still have other options for attaching your fabric to your stabilizer, which you absolutely need to do. But the first question is, why would I even want to do this? There's a couple reasons. The first reason could be that your project is too bulky to fit in between the hoops, the rings of the hoop, like a quilt or a fleece jacket, something that's really, really thick, and no matter how hard you try, you cannot get it between the two rings. Another option would be it's made of a material that would be crushed like velvet by being put into the hoop, and it would never lose the imprint of the hoop, essentially. Or it's too small to fit in the hoop, for instance. Any of those reasons, you might end up putting your fabric on top of the hoop. And some people just really like how relaxed the fabric is able to be when it's not hooped. And so some people will primarily float all their projects. All right, so I've got that laid on top there. And we are going to go ahead and advance the stitch out. And I don't want to have a monochrome setting. So I am going to uncheck the one color and then hit OK. And then same thing for Creative 4.5, folks. We're going to go to stitch out, and we need to just double check that we are turning off that monochrome setting. Okay, so in Applique Creator, it's going to do a series of lines before the final stitch, the final satin stitch. And we can preview that using the paint icon on my Creative Icon. And it looks like we're going to have a straight stitch, another straight stitch, and then a satin stitch. And that's really, really common. It's, even on designs that you buy on the internet, that will be applique designs, is they should have two lines to start. One's a placement line to show you where to place your fabric, and then the other one is a cut line. Okay, so we'll start with our placement line. No, excuse me. We're going to start with our basting box, silly me, because we have to tack my fabric down. So that, depending on your machine, if you're on a Creative Icon 2, it's in the paint palette, lots of stuff in the paint palette. It says baste, and I tap it, and it says, do you want me to baste around the design or baste around the hoop? I'll just have it based around the hoop. Normally I would have it based around the design, but I'm going to have stitching in the middle anyway with this applique, so I think it'll be okay. So based around hoop. And it's going to add a new first stitch for me. On the Creative 4.5, it's this little icon with a flower and a butterfly and a box around it. And if I tap it, it adds a basting line around the design. But if you wanted that based around hoop option, you push and hold, and then it gives you two options, and you can select both or one, based around hoop. Okay. So you have a new first stitch, usually, just projected in black. And you can go ahead and use blue tape if you need to sort of hold it down temporarily. And then I just kind of clear the way while keeping my fingers well away from the needle. Yay! Okay. One brief mention about basting boxes, which is what we just did. A lot of machines really hate stitching basting boxes. They just have a lot of trouble getting started where, it's moving the needle, but no stitch is forming. So if that's happening to you, my trick is to stop, obviously, go back. You can go back in your, go to stitch option. You might have to hit baste again to get it to reappear. For instance, you go baste, it would add it again, and then you'd be right back where you started so that you could try again. And then I bring the bobbin thread up. So I'll go needle down, needle up, and then yank on the top thread, and the bobbin thread comes up. And then if you can hold on to both of those, it convinces most machines to go ahead and stitch the basting box for you. Go figure. So that's my pro tip with those basting boxes. Okay, but I got my basting box, so no basting box needed. We will go on. Okay, and like I said, the first step is going to be a placement stitch. And if you are on a Creative 4.5 and you put a straight stitch shape in, you can repeat it twice to mimic this placement cut. so we've got our placement line. And now we are going to place our applique fabric on top and let it run the second set. And this is where I was saying, if you have a Creative 4.5, you would just go back to the same stitch again. Instead of letting it go onto the satin stitch, you'd go back to the first shape, which is the straight stitch, so that you could do this again. Okay, so now we're going to start that cut stitch. Oh, my machine unthreaded, so let's rethread that. And this will be a good chance to practice retreating in the design. Okay, so to go back in a design, I could go back one by one, but I really just need to restart color number 2. So I'm going to go back to color number 1, down to color number 2, and call it good. So this would be a good time to point out that I'm seeing a little bit of white bobbin thread coming to the top, just little white dots. And so I know how to correct for that. I am in thread metering mode, so I am going to go to Settings, turn off Active Stitch Technology, and then lower my tension a couple of clicks, and we'll see if I like that better. Okay, so now we are going to trim off the excess fabric that is beyond our stitching. And you have to trim it as close as possible. Curved scissors work the best for this. I don't have curved scissors right now, so I'm just going to use a really nice sharp pair here, and I'm going to pull up firmly on the fabric to stress it against those stitches and cut it as close to the stitches as possible, hopefully without cutting through the stitches. If I do cut through the stitches a little bit, it's not like going to make me throw out the project, because again, this is supposed to all get covered by satin stitching. Okay, now while I do this, and maybe while you're doing this as well, and you can just listen to me, I want to mention that that part where I just applied the red fabric to the purple background was an occasion where some people might have used like painter's tape or spray-based to hold the red fabric during the tack down or cut lines. And I'm not opposed to spray-based, but I do have some caveats for you. Spray-based, or like 505 spray, is usually used to put quilt layers together, like your batting and your top and your backing, but it does get used to hold things temporarily on embroideries. When you use spray-based, I always want you to spray the thing that is being applied on top. So in my case, it would be this red fabric. And I would actually take the red fabric elsewhere, like to a garbage can or to a designated cardboard box, or even outside, and I would spray a little dot of the aerosolized glue onto it. So the reason that I want you to move somewhere else with your aerosolized glue is aerosolized glue, as you can imagine, will get other places than just the spot you spray it at. So for instance, if you spray it onto the base fabric and then put your applique fabric on top, you've sprayed onto your hoop. And so your hoop gets some that glue on it, and it gets really gross really fast. And for obvious reasons, I don't want that glue anywhere near your machine. Okay, so I've finished my trimming, and we're going to go ahead and run the satin stitch now, and I will see you when it is done. All right, hooray! We have our design done, and it looks really, really good. So that is Applique Creator for you if you have a Creative Icon or a Creative Icon 2. And you can mimic this if you have Shape Creator on a different machine. At this point, we would rip out our basting, take it out of the hoop, and remove our stabilizer. I did want to show you guys real quick. This is a tearaway, and I specifically used a tearaway just so I could show you what it's like to remove a tearaway if you haven't done that before. So normally I would remove the basting, but I'll just rip around the basting for efficiency in this. And this one happened to be a very lightweight tearaway. It probably was a little too lightweight. And so if I had really been concerned about some crunching as it started that satin stitch, I could have put another layer of lightweight tearaway underneath, again, like floating it. It's not going to be trapped in the hoop, but I would have put it under all of the layers, and it kind of would have just gotten integrated as it got stitched over. You don't even have to usually like baste it in place. Because 2 layers of a lightweight tearaway, can approximate like a medium weight tearaway, which is pretty cool. Another thing that you can do with stabilizer that goes a little bit beyond my beginner talk, in the Grace's great world of stabilizer, is the concept of like mixing and matching stabilizers. So I find that I can make compromises with the stabilizers I use as long as I'm still addressing, the stitch out and the long-term life of the project. So for instance, let's go back to my soccer jersey example. If I was conflicted about using a heavyweight cutaway, because I need a cutaway, it's a soccer jersey, it's going to get washed and dried and sweated in, but I didn't want to use a heavyweight cutaway because it was going to leave sort of a visible mark where the edge of the cutaway is. But it's a dense design, so I really do need a heavyweight something to help manage all the density. So I have been known to layer my stabilizers, and I will put a lightweight cutaway closest to the project, and then I will put my heavyweight tearaway on top of that. And then when I'm done, the heavyweight tearaway has served its purpose of stabilizing during stitch out. And then I rip it away, exposing the cutaway underneath. And then I'll cut the cutaway, but because it's that lightweight cutaway, it's way less perceptible. And that's going to stay in there and help during the lifetime of the project to, continue to stabilize it. So mixing and matching like that, again, it's an art, not a science. And so it's definitely something that you're open to interpretation on. Now, I haven't been exhaustive with embroidery today. I didn't talk about topping stabilizers. We didn't talk about my Sona at all. This is hopefully an introduction to the world of embroidery and getting you more confident, going out and doing designs. There's my tearaway, by the way. Turned out really nice. Ripped right off. And there we go. All right, so I have one last thing to show just the Creative Icon 2 owners because they're the only ones with a projector. What we're going to show you is, a potential use of the projector for, alignment purposes. So what I have is, again, just some stabilizer is hooped, and then I'm going to float a project on top of it. But this project is smaller than the hoop. And so I would like to be able to see where does this fabric need to be placed for it to, properly have the design stitched somewhere in its center. So I'm in Embroidery Edit right now, and I have pulled in a mini design. You can pull in a big design, but your projector only shows you part of the design at a time. So this really works best with a smaller design. So I've pulled in a mini design, and then I'm going to turn on the projector using either the button on the front or the identical icon on the screen. And it's going to want me to attach the hoop. It's going to dim the lights for me. And then, as long as you're in Embroidery Edit, you will get a new icon appearing on screen, which says Move Hoop. And this is because your projector can only project like, a 4 by 4 inch square or so, showing whatever's supposed to be on this part of the hoop. And the flower isn't really in this part of the hoop. I can just see the tip of it. And so I'm going to move the hoop towards me. It's a little backwards of what you think, in order to reveal more of the flower, essentially. Okay, now the flower is a little hard to see. What I have found, besides the fact that your light needs to be all the way down and your brightness needs to be all the way up inside of your projection editing, it also helps if you turn your design into a white color. So I'm going to go into color, and instead of being yellow, change color and drag that tint up to white. And there it's projecting a little bit stronger. And of course I can see, oh, I have plenty of room. I can go ahead and put the fabric here, and that will stitch out there. Now, when you are moving your hoop around, keep in mind, you're not moving the design. Even though the design looks like it's moving, it's just advancing in anticipation of the hoop moving. If you look at your screen, your design is not moving in the hoop itself. If you want to move the design, you can do that. You just go to your edit design, your normal edit design options, and scooch it around, and the projection will reflect that. You can see me moving it kind of in and out of the projection range. There you go. So the projector is not as accurate as the precise positioning. So I do think the projector is useful for visualizing. It's useful for things like this, where we're sort of finding our place in the hoop. But I personally wouldn't use it for really precise, the design has to go here. I would use precise positioning for that. Now, if you feel like your projector is way off in its projecting, there is a calibration in your settings. If you go to Settings and then scroll over to Camera and Projector, there is Adjust Projection, Fine Tune, and it's going to talk you through looking at your stitch plate and lining up some points on your stitch plate with a laser. And the instructions are actually really, really good on that. So you can just follow those written instructions. Okay, that is what I wanted to show you guys for the projector. So there is, more beyond this, but I'm hoping this is going to get you going and feeling more comfortable, as you start your embroidery journey. So thank you for going on this journey with us. Appreciate, your patience as you waited for the other people to watch their part of the video. And we will see you in the next one.